Planning Commission meeting for June 12th with deliberations on the appeals of the hearings official decision of Capitol Hill PUD 17-1. My name's John Borofsky. I'm going to ask the rest of the commission to introduce themselves for the camera. Everyone's got their mouth full.
I'm Kristen Taylor.
John Jaworski.
Bill Randall.
Stephen Baker.
All right. Hopefully you all got a chance to see the email that I put out there as regarding procedural. We've got a lot of things still to get through here tonight, so we're going to go a little bit different this way. We'll hit the appeal issue. Staff will give a brief little overview of it and the approval criteria that it has to hit, and then hopefully if there's issues, we can still have a full, in-depth, and productive conversation on each one of these, but hopefully that'll help move things along a little bit. Also, if your point's been made, just kind of say, okay, I agree, thank you, just so that we can get out of here at a reasonable time. I'm going to ask staff at this point, is there anything that you would like to bring up? You made a point earlier before we started the meeting that we might want to go back and revisit issue number 5, which was one that we were going to revisit at some point later in the deliberations. So if you wanted to speak to that as to why we want to do it now, or
Sure, I'd be happy to. For the record, I'm Gabe Flock, a senior planner with the city's Planning and Development Department. At your last meeting, we got some initial direction on potential revisions to one of the conditions of approval in the hearings official's decision related to the requirements for geotechnical analysis. And so what we heard was that the commission wanted some additional language to clarify that the requirement was for adherence to recommendations in both the initial or the preliminary analysis submitted with the application, as well as the subsequent geotechnical analysis required for each individual permit, and also that you wish to have clarity on the need for that analysis to address potential offsite impacts. And so we've crafted a revised condition of approval. It's up on the screen here. If you want to take a moment to read through it, and see if it satisfies those concerns. Hopefully we can pick back up and at least take an initial vote on appeal issue number 5.
Could you just highlight what are the key changes to what's on page 22 when you quote that there was a hearings official did put a condition of approval?
Right. So you want the original condition, or do you want?
No, I know
yeah.
I have it. I'm just saying what is the key difference that's made here?
So if you look on the screen about halfway through, it says the development proposed with each permit shall adhere to the recommended standards for design and construction as contained in the preliminary geotechnical analysis approved for the tentative PUD, as well as any additional geotechnical analyses required for individual permits. The geotechnical analysis required for individual permits shall also address potential offsite impacts.
Which was what they said the first one didn't, okay.
Yeah.
Or claimed, okay.
I think it was in particular from Commissioner Randall that we heard some specific direction or interest in this language, and so we wanted to see if we could dispense with it here. We'll obviously have an opportunity to come back for the final review of the order on Thursday, but we thought we'd start here and then move back through, start with appeal issue number 9, I believe, for tonight's discussion.
Right.
So.
Yeah, I think this addresses what I heard us discuss at the last deliberations. So thank you. I appreciate you doing it in advance.
Agree.
yeah, I guess, I kind of brought this up as well as the offsite impacts. One, if you build one building, is it going to affect the other buildings? If for some reason that happens and they say yes, there may be impacts, how would that get enforced?
Well, my understanding is that the requirement is for the geotechnical engineer to provide recommendations such that those offsite impacts would be addressed. In other words, if there was potential for some harm, some slope failure by in a particular location, that they would provide recommendations, say for foundation placement or design or shoring it up, so that it would not cause those offsite impacts. And it could be different for each permit type, whether it's a site development
Right.
permit for a private road, or for a house on an individual lot, or for the public improvement permit for the construction of Capitol Drive. So each one's a little bit unique in the sense of what the engineer would have to evaluate.
Right. I guess my concern would be if you've got two lots that are owned by different people. A person's getting ready to build his house on this lot. Engineer comes in and says, if you build your house on this lot, yes, we can make sure your lot's safe, but it may impact the other lot, and there's no way to address it so that both lots could get built. Is there an area?
So what I'm reading, Commissioner Borowski,
Uh-huh.
at least my understanding when I read this, is essentially this is going to preclude the impacts to the other site. So essentially with engineering, basically with engineering, you can do
Yeah.
anything. You've seen it, right? We can build structures under the
Yeah.
ocean. So it's basically saying,
Okay.
you've got to contain with those offsite, whatever
Right.
your engineering solutions are, they can't actually have offsite impacts. So if there are recommendations of how to build whatever you build to keep it contained, to not do it.
All right.
That's where that last sentence.
Yeah.
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 Okay. So then we will, is it an approved or is it?
Well, it was informally tabled.
No, I
at the
know,
last meeting,
the
so-
wording though, so the hearing's official, do we affirm the hearing's official decision with a condition?
If you
What's
could-
the,
if
what's
you
the
could break it
terminology?
down just slightly. So I put a conclusion statement here that helps capture what your decision would effectively do. So based on the available information in the record and with this modification to condition of number 10, Planning Commission finds the application complies with EC 9.83202. That's related to the South Hill study requirement, which contains the geotechnical analysis policy. And we added reference to subsection 6 of the criteria as well, because the issue comes up again on appeal related to the risk of slope failure. So we're tying this to,
With modifications.
correct.
Affirming with a modified condition of approval.
Okay,
Yeah.
yeah, I
And
just,
we're
wa-
just straw poll voting
Right.
Yeah,
at this
it's
point.
just one piece of
okay,
it.
so everybody who agrees with what has been presented, raise your hand. All right, thank you. Okay, so next we're on to appeal item number 9, which is on page 25 of the AIS. Staff,
Yeah, just, this mouse is just not working.
Let's see, I'm gonna go back to this page.
Who's taking this, me?
Yeah.
All right. Appeal issue number 9 is that, let's see. So the appellant made a number of arguments about this one. I can't go through all of these, but there was multiple errors that were cited. I'm sure you've read through those. So talking about the preservation areas along the Ribbon Trail, and the site is currently, the views of the site. So the criteria that this relates to, it put up on the screen for you so you can refer to the criteria itself, and that's what this part of the appeal is based on. The hearings official found that the combined private lot preservation areas and the common preservation area of Tract A would provide substantial screening for areas to the east, and also things like requiring trees on individual lots that cannot be removed until a construction permit is issued. in the developable areas and things like that, as far as it relates to screening for the building locations and the bulk and height. And I don't want to spend a lot of time.
Yeah,
I
no,
think-
that's fine.
I think you
Just-
kinda get
That
the
kind of
idea
gives
it,
us,
so-
gives us the gist of it.
Yeah.
Commissioner Randall.
I think this one really is very similar to 7, how we decided there that the scale, bulk, and height with the R1 was adequate. I think for me, we're going to be talking about lot coverage later, and I think that's one we need to clarify, but I would affirm the hearing official on this one.
I agree.
I just had two
Sure.
two quick questions, because this also talks about trees and fencing. When I'm reading, it mentions trees and fencing in the initial appeal, which was on 149 of the initial one we got. I guess my question is I think it comes up later that lot owners may be able to put up their own individual fences. Okay, I'm just prefacing this now. I'm not sure exactly where to bring it up. I think I read it later. And I guess the issue is there's no way to guarantee that they do that, but my issue is, of these lots, if lot owners did put up fences, would they preclude wildlife habitat movement through the area, or is that only through a specific channel? Because they're not putting up the same kind of fence as the 6-foot agricultural fence, more than likely.
I don't know that I can answer your question with
Okay.
specificity, but we did include some language that addresses this issue of the 6-foot see-through agricultural type
Understand that
fence on the
fence, yeah.
east
I'm talking
boundary.
about the fences on the individual lots.
Right, and so my understanding is that the hearings official's decision does not include any limitations on what would otherwise be allowed in an R1 zone with regard to fencing. So as it stands,
They can put
fences
up
would be
fences.
allowed on individual lots.
Okay, and I guess my question was, because it's hard for me to see all the lots, if fences were put on all the lots, let's say, would they then interfere with the channel of where these wildlife move through?
Oh,
You see what I'm saying? I mean, if this is where they move through, and then all of a sudden there's lots here and they put up fences, that's different than the fence that allowed them to get in there and then get
Sure.
hit by the fence of the
I
property.
I do understand the concern, and we looked at the criteria closely and combed through the record as it relates to the wildlife corridor concept. And frankly, we found no specific criteria included in the South Hill study policies or the PUD that explicitly address wildlife corridors. And so we struggled to find a basis to, in the criteria to address the challenge to the fence on the eastern boundary, which was what was specifically raised in the appeal, as I understand it. So we've included that language here. One of the concerns also, just to relate it back to the criterion at hand, is that as a see-through fence for the purpose of allowing wildlife passage, it has no bearing on screening as relates to this criteria, which is about adequate screening for surrounding property. So to the extent that it is concerning wildlife passage, we don't think it has relevance under this approval criterion.
Okay. Another clarification, because it comes up all the time, and I didn't know whether to mention here, because then we can roll. Trees need to be replaced by lots, trees need to be replaced by the developer. Never states where they replaced the tree. I'm assuming the tree has to be replaced in the vicinity it was taken down? In other words, if I took down 20 trees on a site of 940 feet, do I then put 20 trees down on
I think
600-foot elevation? Do I
Well,
have to
I
put them
think-
back where they were?
generally that is in practice how it happens. Now,
Okay.
what I'm going to ask Nick to do is look at the condition and see if it specifies proximity. I think it may.
I think we only did in the one condition where they had to remove trees for the storm drainage facility in Tract A. We said they had to be put back in the same vicinity.
Yeah, well, that's a concern for me, and I don't know where to bring that up, because that makes no sense to me if you're going to remove a lot of trees and you put them somewhere else, especially if they're above the 900-foot line.
Well, and perhaps it's better addressed under the appeal issues related to criteria involving tree preservation as opposed to
I'm
screening.
just
But
saying, okay,
and we can
that's
have
why I
an-
asked it now, so I could move forward quicker later.
So
Okay.
the lots above 900 square above 900 feet don't have any of these preservation areas, okay? Most, there might be one, there might be a portion of a lot or two towards the north.
Oh, I thought it related to more than just preservation areas. I thought
But
they
those
did-
other ones, they have restrictions on the trees, but it's, you replace a tree if you take it out because you're putting your building there.
Or
So
road.
obviously, the tree can't go back where it was. It's going to go
Yeah,
somewhere
I know
else.
that, but what I'm saying, in that proximity, if possible.
Well, it goes somewhere
And
on the lot.
So just to preserve that option, I think we'll get to it in an appeal issue coming up shortly, and it's a possibility that, based on that interest, we could modify the condition to be more clear about the location, or perhaps to require an arborist to make a recommendation as to the location. So I can think of a few options that we could use to
Okay.
clarify that point.
So I just had one quick thing, and that may be in the code, in the tree preservation. It's not as to
No.
where it goes, where the trees get replaced.
No, the code
Okay,
doesn't
okay.
specify the
Okay.
location.
My question would be, as far as fencing, no fencing is allowed in the preservation area, is that correct?
That's not explicitly required as a condition of approval. And so that's one of the issues I think that the appellants brought forward, is that there was this mention of a fence along the eastern property line, but it wasn't, it wasn't addressed more specifically.
And I was more thinking about the homeowners that are allowed to put fences up in R1. Would they be allowed to put one up in a preservation area?
I believe there's a condition of approval that precludes structures within the preservation areas.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, yeah, condition
fine.
8 says no above-ground structures and no grading.
Perfect, there we go, that satisfies me.
First of all, is it clear that,
But I don't think a fence is a structure, but the grading might preclude
It is.
walls with footers.
A fence is a structure, is my understanding. I'll look up the definition just to clarify it here.
30 inches.
Yeah,
But again, we could add that clarity to the condition when we get
It
there.
was just,
true.
that kind of goes to screening for me, and as far as the view shed from the ribbon trail, if individual property
Okay.
owners can.
Just for clarity, the definition, codified definition of structure is anything constructed or built, an edifice or building of any kind, or any piece of work artificially built up or composed of parts joined together in some definite manner. That's pretty all-encompassing.
yeah.
I think that includes
how-
fences.
My understanding has been like an easement, you can't have structure
Yeah.
Right.
fences.
We could add the word fence in the condition if we felt the need. That was the intent.
Yes.
Yeah,
I mean, I was suggesting we just add the wording fence to the condition, because we already have a condition there as well.
Okay, well, when we get to that appeal
Yeah,
issue, we can do that.
Thank you. All right, so is everybody okay with saying that the hearings official did not err on number 9? Stephen?
Well, I think there's enough votes anyways. Again, part of my concern is that it's partially related to this, but it's related to the South Hill study and the 900-plus line, where there's some additional stipulations, and we keep falling back and saying it's covered by the R1 zone, but essentially all property over a certain elevation is required to be in R1 zoning. So South Hill study added these additional conditions beyond the R1 zoning when they wrote the study. So
Okay.
it's mainly the area above 901, where I don't see that what we have as a condition will guarantee that.
Okay. I'm going to take a vote here. Yeah, it was 4 to 1. Okay. Number 10. Or was that number 10?
That was 9. All
That
right,
was
number
9.
10, moving up to 10.
Okay, number 10 is appeal issue that the PUD is designed and cited to minimize impacts to the natural environment, and that the hearings official erred by waiving the requirements for a licensed arborist on the professional design team, and by disregarding the evidence provided by Jim Merwin, I believe is a registered professional forester, that gives evidence on behalf of the neighborhood group. And I want to just point out here that I think we've made a pretty good argument in our report that the decision to waive that requirement lies solely with the planning director, which was made at the time the application was filed, and that's not the hearings official's ability to do that waiver. And so the hearings official did not waive the requirement. It was the planning director, and then the application goes forward. So.
And I think to the substance of the argument that appellants raised, that she disregarded the opposing evidence, we find that she simply agreed with the applicant's evidence over that of the opponents. She didn't disregard it. We think she weighed it properly in terms of her role as a hearings official.
Any disagreement with staff's conclusion? Hearings official's conclusion and staff's explanation of it. All right. All those, I'm going to say in favor from now on. All right. Thank you. All right. Number 10 is
Actually, on
5-0.
we're on to 11 and 12, I think.
11 and 12.
Coupled together.
Yeah, there's a lot of stuff up there. You don't have to read it. There's 2 appeal issues wrapped in this one that pertain to the same criteria, and that's why I put it all up there. This is about the city's acknowledged Goal 5 inventory, and that the hearings official erred by improperly evaluating evidence in support of compliance with this criterion, and also that the hearings official erred by stating that the evidence suggests there is minimal threat of wind throw for on-site trees and trees within adjacent Hendricks Park. The hearings official supported what staff had talked about, and that the site is designated as a natural site of visual prominence and prominent and plentiful vegetation in the 1978 Scenic Sites Working Paper. I think also of note is that she noted that the Metro Plan does not designate any of the subject property as a natural resource area, and that the applicant minimized impacts by avoiding unnecessary disruption or removal of attractive natural features and vegetation. And even in this part of the decision, she does acknowledge the applicant's forester, Mr. Mayorin, and I think that pretty much
Okay.
covers it.
All right. Commissioner Baker.
The only question I had, and I'm not sure that, because I don't know, it says significant on-site vegetation, and there's apparently some very large redwood tree, and I don't know where it's located and why exactly, why if it's in the middle of the roadway, obviously it has to be removed. Was cited in the,
Have to-
We need more clarity on it.
Is that the one that's called out in the previous appeal
Yeah.
issue?
yeah. And again, I don't have a strong objection, it's just if that's considered to be
It's
one of the
located in
most
tract
significant
C.
trees on the site, then. And I couldn't tell from the information exactly where it was. And I thought maybe staff was more familiar with that.
It says in Taxi. That's in the
Yeah, so back on
portion.
Appeal Issue 9, which we just finished, it states the hearings, this is the appellant's statement, that the hearings official erred in not recognizing the planned removal of one large redwood tree. There's a number, and it says it's in good condition, located in Tract C, and that it's in direct violation of the guidelines for preservation areas. So, is there interest in going back to look at that and try to find it?
I don't have any.
I think the rest of the commission's ready to move on, so.
Okay.
Anybody else have any questions or comments about 11 or 12? Okay. Seeing none, I'm going to ask we all agree that the hearings official did not err. Okay. 5-0. Thank you. Next is 13, tree preservation.
Actually, 13, 14, and 15 all fall under the same criteria that was cited.
Right, and so, in other words, they all relate to tree preservation.
Yeah.
So that's the section of the code that we're,
But I put the criteria up here, but we can go through each one separately, which I think is the best way to do. So number 13 is that the hearings official made errors regarding condition 8 in proving that the applicant's tree preservation plan complies with this part of the criterion. The hearings official cites the applicant's arborist analysis, which was provided even after having the waiver. The applicant did get an arborist to review the tree preservation plan and gave support for that plan that had been drafted by the applicant's landscape architect. And so the hearings official reviewed that and concurred with that and found that that the applicant had agreed to revisions to the tree preservation plan notes that staff had recommended, and you've seen those in the conditions of approval. There's at least 3 or 4, maybe 5 conditions that relate to tree preservation that we added. I think that pretty much covers it.
I would just add, under appeal issue number 13, the issue of condition number 8 comes up, and that happens to be the condition that we were just discussing with regard to fences.
Yeah.
And so, if I could, I'll just take a moment to read that and suggest an addition. It says that with...
Subtraction.
Within individual preservation areas of Lot 5 and Lots 8 through 19, and on tracks A, B, C, and D, no above-ground structure that requires a building permit, no fences would be added, no impacts to preserved trees, and no grading activity shall be allowed. The only exception is within Tract A, where storm drainage facility and associated grading and maintenance, as shown on the plan, site plans, is allowed. So that would be my recommended location to insert clarity about fences, to the extent it could be read as, the way it's written now, it talks about an above-ground structure that requires a building permit. There are instances when a fence on interior property lines would not require a permit. So I think it is a good addition to get at that question.
And I threw in, I threw in or remove. Let me just, I want to understand why that requires a building permit was put in there, because what about, because it is a preservation area, what if it just says no above ground structure, comma, no impacts to preserved trees, and you just remove, that requires a building permit?
Yeah, we had that discussion internally, and we talked about what if someone wanted to put the Rubbermaid shed in an area, or a swing set, or something like that doesn't require a permit, but
I think the threshold, and you may know, but I think it's 200 square feet in the building code is sort of a kind of a general threshold for the size that may require a permit. So we can
change it.
I think what Mr. Taylor's saying is if you're wanting to limit those accessory buildings that don't require a permit, you really need to take out that sentence rather than just add 4 fences.
Where, I
Is that
guess,
what you're saying?
yeah, kind of, it's just, this is where I would go back to, what is the intent around a preservation area? So it's being used to comply with certain code sections. It's being used to make decisions that are aiding the hearings official in making decisions. So let's say structure, let's say a whole play structure is put in a preservation area, it didn't need a building permit. Is that truly a preservation area anymore? So that's where I go to, is what do we do, that's kind of, so by saying no structures, then it truly is a preservation area. So really I go to what's the intent? How is it being used to comply with these code sections?
And I would say it seems within the realm of possibility that you could look at that additional restriction in the context of this approval criteria. To the extent that those structures could, even without a building permit, could harm trees that are worthy of preservation and run counter to the criteria, we could make a case to further restriction.
Well, in this particular one, and this is where I want to go back to I could go back to the language. This preservation area isn't just being used to comply with this section. It's also being used to comply with the refinement plan. I mean, it's being used in multiple areas. So if it was just this, I might actually be less particular. Right now, I'm like, it's being used as a measure to comply with a bunch of things that is it being minimized in terms of a preservation area by allowing
Right.
that?
Well, and I only suggested it here because it's the issue before you at the
No,
moment.
sure.
And we would want to know more specifically where you would like us to, I mean, if we're going to make that change to relate it to other
Yeah,
policies of the South Hill study, for example.
yeah, yeah.
Commissioner Randall.
I have a suggested wording on condition 8. Based on what Commissioner Taylor was saying, if we reworded that to say no above-ground structure or fence, semicolon, no impacts to preserved trees, et cetera. And then that would, I think, cover those accessory structures that don't need permits. It would cover the fence concern. So I just throw that out as a suggested wording.
Yeah, and I would just add from my experience in the breadth and depth of this criterion is, I think that would be supportable if we related it to that. We could also reach to other policies to shore it up.
I think we should I would like to reach, because I
Okay.
think there's legitimacy in reaching. Now, can I do that right this second? No. But we can do, anyways, I can look at it while we're.
Okay, thank you.
And I put myself in the queue. I have concerns that were brought up by the applicant about the wildlife fence for security that they wanted to put up, and their concerns for security of the backyards of these houses, and the 6-foot wire fence. So what you're saying is that condition that you would put down would preclude that, correct?
It would.
And so that, I've got this floor for right now, Commissioner Baker. I thought that was a legitimate point that they brought up, that you've got a public ribbon trail next to it going up a hill and into private property. And the ability to secure your private property, to me, is something that I wouldn't want to preclude them from doing if it could be done without visually impacting the area too significantly.
I think in our review of the application and that issue, we didn't have much information to go on at all in the context of how that fence might affect individual trees. We didn't have a specific design with post hole locations or things like that. I mean, so it's hard to say how it fits in the context of tree preservation under these issues.
No, what I'm saying is if we put that condition that you're saying, you just said it would preclude that.
It would.
And I don't, so with that being said, I couldn't vote for that condition. Commissioner Baker.
Well, I thought we were talking about a condition that would only apply to the preservation areas. So it's not the rest of the lots. It's only the area that we've designated in the PUD as preservation areas that would have this stipulation about limitation about fences and other
Yeah.
accessories.
In their testimony, they wanted to put it at the bottom of close to the ribbon trail,
Well,
Nick, can you show where the fence would be
But
located?
again,
in the preservation area.
So let's take a look at where it's.
It wasn't implied. If they wanted it on the edge of the ribbon trail, that would be one thing. But I assumed that we were talking about, what we were talking about is, yeah, there's so that they
This is
could,
tract A, and I believe they call it out on another plan, this area here.
And where's the ribbon trail?
Ribbon trail is
Okay.
up here,
Right,
and then it gets closer when you get over here.
yeah, see, so I'm personally would be fine with it where they're proposing it. It's far enough off the ribbon trail, but it is in the preservation area.
Well, again, my concern is not just fences, but other, structures, storage, garage store, equipment, backyard storage things, play equipment. In other words, if it's supposed to be a preservation area, then we should not allow those kinds of activities to take place in there, because then it really is not a preservation. And again, I don't have any problem with a fence along the back of the preservation area that's happens to be, 1 foot on the property owner's side. That's not in the preservation area.
So I want to try to loop back to some findings that we put in here with regard to adequate screening. And we didn't find a basis for precluding the fence under the criterion for adequate screening.
Right.
What we're talking about now is a condition that's related to tree preservation. And I think it would be relatively easy to carve out an exception for the agricultural see-through fence along the east property line within Tract A. It would require some additional language in Condition 8 to specify that that particular fence would be allowed. So I think we could accommodate sort of the best of both in terms of what I'm hearing, preference.
So you're saying that agricultural type fence would be not only along that east property line, I guess, but also down the common property lines in the preservation area, or just on the east side?
My
Not the
understanding.
east side.
Just on the
Yeah.
east side?
East,
As far as I
east-
know.
Right, I understand.
The thing I want to look back at is if they actually called out
Right,
along the
right.
south and anywhere along the north property line.
Right.
I just recall a couple of call-outs on one of them, not this map, but probably the landscape or something, and they had a note with an arrow, so I just want to look back and see where it is, so.
But if the commission is interested in allowing that exception for the agricultural fence within Tract A along the east boundary, and to the extent it was proposed on the short segments of the north boundary and the south boundary, we can look that up and come back with language for Condition 8 and present that on Thursday.
I would be fine with that.
I would too.
I found some of the references, so I can give them to you afterwards, in terms of, the hearings official actually clearly goes through and talks about the preservation area and how it complies with the various refinement plan policies. She's pretty clear.
They're easy to name, you can just name them.
Yeah, that would be helpful.
Okay, so page 18, or page 25 of the AIS, of the hearings official decision, it's page 18, it's policy number 5. She mentions the preserved areas, but she also says there's not a requirement that absolute preservation or lack of impact is noted, so just so you note that. She also notes it on page 20 of her decision, or page 27 of the AIS, so that's page 20 of her decision, page 27 of the AIS. It has to do with it's the policies, you'll see on that page, but she goes in to discuss the preservation areas and how it's meeting, encourage preservation of open space. Those areas characterized by, the A, B, C, and D, and she addresses it there. So there's another location.
Okay.
Yeah, and there might be more, but I found those two.
Okay, so are we okay with adding wording to the condition that they'll bring back on Thursday that's, I'm paraphrasing here, agricultural fence along the proposed line that they had talked about, but no other structures, building, all of that stuff in the preservation area? That's kind of where we're at?
Could we clarify what that line is? The ribbon trail is down here, and where is
Right.
this line now?
The eastern property line of the subject property, right?
Yeah.
This is the ribbon trail here.
So,
This green area here is city property. This line is the boundary.
right.
The fence could be along,
So we're not going to be permitting that fence on city property. It would have to be on the applicant's property.
See,
This is tract A, and then the lighter green is the individual preservation areas for each of these lots.
See, I would feel much more comfortable if the fence was at the edge of tract A and the lots, because then we've actually that preservation area is preserved, without possibility of other stuff being put there. Not just a fence, but a play structure or whatever.
Isn't that the lot line anyway?
Yeah,
Well,
the
he's-
lot lines are at the eastern
Where the light
edge of the
green is-
light green.
Medium green is the lot line.
So why wouldn't we allow them to put the fence at the lot line rather than at the property line?
So say if this property, I think what we're saying is you can fence in,
No,
lower.
go all the
lower.
way down.
Between the green and light green.
this is a preservation area, so what we're talking about with the revision.
Does that condition
you
actually
put a fence
apply?
in this area.
What I'm talking
Oh, yeah,
about is the dark
individual.
green area that's not the city's, that stretch.
This is tract A.
So I believe it's within the commission's purview to look at revising the applicant's proposed location, that rather than being on the eastern property boundary of Tract A, where it meets the city property. What I'm hearing is an interest, at least from Commissioner Baker, to move it to the interior edge of Tract A, the boundary of the private lots and Tract A, which would move that fence farther into the site, to the edge of the lots.
What I see.
Again, I'm concerned that this criterion relates to tree preservation. I mean, there may be an interest with respect to security
Yeah,
or
it's-
wildlife passage,
The
but,
other, you got to tie the other refinement plan policies into it.
right, the three appeal issues that we're talking about relate to tree preservation. So I just want to try to couch the discussion in the context of that. What I'm not clear on is, in terms of a specific design, what the difference would be in locating it either at the edge, the outer edge of Tract A, or to the individual lots.
Mr. Taylor, then Commissioner.
Well, I mean, I hear what you're saying, and that's why I had this propensity to go back to some of the other conditions of approval related to appeal items, as you said, so that we're basically responding to what's in front of us. A great example is a lot of Hendricks Park. So I know the city had its own process that it went around to various neighbors, because essentially what happened is those structures that don't take permits basically flowed up into city property. So the end of their property line was not their property. They actually were building these non-permittable structures on city property. So essentially, they were just leaking. So, I mean, that's one of the potential outcomes of having a fence at that eastern property line of the preservation area. Granted, it doesn't talk about the tree preservation necessarily. It does talk more about the actual, what the intent of the preservation area is.
I think if I might try to tease things out a little bit, I think we have a couple of things that we're talking about here.
Without a doubt.
One is the idea of the fence as proposed on the eastern edge of the property where it abuts city property. Another proposed by Commissioner Baker would be to move the fence from the eastern edge of Tract A to the western edge of Tract A. And for both of those options, staff needs help from the commission identifying approval criteria that support that condition. It sounds like, Commissioner Taylor, you were speaking to approval criteria that support continuing to locate the fence along the very eastern edge.
No, it's actually more in support of what Commissioner Baker
Oh,
is saying.
okay.
Yeah, so it's basically, but it's not addressing this criterion. It's not addressing this
Okay.
appeal item as well.
Yeah, I was going to respond that, the concern about potential other structures, creeping into the common area, I think we've resolved with the condition.
You're right, you did resolve
It's
that.
effectively precluded,
Yeah,
and
that's a
it
good
would be
point.
an enforceable matter if we had unpermitted structures that violate the condition, we'd have them removed.
That's a good
And I think,
about-
just to point out the applicant's concern with regard to security, as is relevant here, they did express in their testimony interest in having that fence on the boundary of their property so that folks, using the Ribbon Trail, the public passing through there would understand where that private property begins and ends.
Mr. Randall, you had your hand up. I think we could fit this into tree preservation if we said an agricultural fence can be permitted along the eastern boundary of Track A if it doesn't impact any significant trees.
We can take that concept and maybe come back with some refined language that would be added to Condition 8 to capture that if that's the commission's interest.
Commissioner Jaworski.
I don't, as that reads, I have an issue. I think a fence could be put on that boundary, and if there's a significant tree, you just indent the fence a couple of feet, not say, if it doesn't, that's saying you can't have any fence at all if it impacts the significant.
Well, we could also potentially, just an idea here, is require that an arborist evaluate the proposed fence design such that it does not harm or cause the removal of preservation trees. I mean, we require an arborist report for a variety of different conditions.
So he could be allowed to build a straight
Yeah.
fence on his boundary, then if a
Yeah.
significant tree was there, go around it and then continue.
Yes.
We can.
Yeah, I'd prefer that rather than saying now they can't have a fence at all because there's a significant tree on a
Yeah,
straight
no,
line.
that's kind of what I had in mind.
Okay.
Got to leave the trees. You can't cut a tree down to put the fence up. Mr. Baker.
And the only thing that I would be concerned about is what is our definition of significant tree?
The code
It's in
actually
the code.
defines that.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's a certain caliber?
Well, it's, 8 inches diameter breast height, living tree.
Okay, so is the commission okay with that and having them come back with that on Thursday? The wording, so it's going to preclude anything getting built in the preservation areas, anything being sited in the preservation areas, and then allowing for a fence as long as it doesn't impact the trees.
So we're agreeing to 13, 14th, and 15 with that condition, is that correct?
Well, that was 13.
That was 13, but
Okay.
you can.
Okay, that was 13.
Yeah, let's just leave it at 13. And I'm going to have,
Related enough.
They do,
When
but-
Come back Thursday, we can.
yeah, all in favor of what I just stated? 4, 5? Okay, and then,
So are we going past
14.
14 and 15, or are we?
Yep, we're on to 14 and 15.
is the commission okay with 14 and 15 also being covered by what we just discussed?
I am.
Okay. Stephen?
Well, this is the same thing. On 14, I didn't have.
Okay, so 14 is 5-0. And then 15 is the stormwater one, and
So 15 is the one that
Commissioner
they're taking.
Jaworski.
Yeah, oh, okay.
No, I didn't, I'm sorry, I was just,
Oh,
15 is the one where they're saying that the hearings official erred by allowing trees to be removed in Tract A where the stormwater facility is going to go. I can point that out if nobody understands. It's right here. It's a storm drainage feature that comes from the road and comes down through here. And there's possibly 5 trees that
in the
potentially need
preservation.
to be removed. And then we've got a condition that talks about replacing those. I think we said 2 to 1
Yeah.
in the same general location once the facility is put in. They're talking about there's continued maintenance of the facility, and that can potentially damage the trees down the road in the future.
Right.
sometimes I have a question and it seems like it's specific. Now, where you just showed me, he's running it down the green and building it in the green. Why couldn't he have ran it down the edge of the green and built it in the light-colored green? I don't understand why he would want to go down to preservation.
Well, I think that's so that you can access it in the future, because it's in common Tract A, which the association ends up owning, and you're not,
Well, who owns the light-colored green?
well, that would be that individual lot owner.
So-
I mean-
Oh, that lot goes all the way down and also includes the light green?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. All those lots.
Preservation
All of
area
those.
on the lot.
Okay.
The dark green is common area, or the medium green is common.
Well, again, I think it's based on an engineer's recommendation as to the location. I can't talk to the specifics, but
I think
as
that's
to
probably
where it
why
would be
they kept it
located.
as preservation area, because it, but I'm speaking of.
I did talk with our Public Works, asked them what kind of maintenance happens on that type of a system. It's basically a pipe that's underground with level spreaders at the bottom, and once in a great while, you have to go and
Drain
kind of flush it out and sometimes get some roots out of there, but it doesn't typically require digging it all back up.
Okay. I'm okay with number 15. Everybody else?
Okay.
All right, thank you. 16.
So 13 and 14 are coming back Thursday, 15 we affirmed. Is that?
Wait,
14's not.
14's not.
14 we affirmed.
5-0.
Yep.
14 is affirmed.
Yeah, 14 and 15.
Okay.
Thanks, Beth.
All right, number 16, restoration and replacement. The hearings official asserted a claim unsupported by evidence that prior impacts on trees from existing development have diminished, thus implying that impacts from proposed development would have a similar effect. This is about the protection of natural resources, and the hearings official found that this is the part where she talked about the ridgeline's been slightly modified, and the natural features and tree canopy have grown back in those residential areas that are around it. And impacts have been mitigated over time. Preservation areas comply with the level of protection contemplated by the Metro Plan and the South Hills study. And this is the criteria for that, for the sections that they have alluded to in their argument, so.
Commissioner Taylor.
The only comment I have is I noticed that in the staff report on page 33 of the current AIS that we're looking at, there's a reference to the staff report. The reference was page 24, about in the future, the loss of any identified preservation trees will be replaced by the homeowners association, and any identified preservation trees lost within the individual lot preservation areas will be replaced by the lot owner. I'm just wondering, because these private agreements really aren't part of this application, are you concerned, I mean, basically, they're gonna be replaced regardless of who they're, is it important to notify who's replacing them, or, yeah? Okay.
yeah, so the finding here is really more descriptive in terms of who might be involved,
Might be
but the
involved.
condition requires a replacement regardless of
Regardless
ownership.
of who's doing it,
Yes.
it's not important that we identify. Perfect.
I have the same question, and Gabe, if you may, again. The restriction doesn't apply to who replaces it, but my question is still on enforcement. Well, who enforces somebody to replace it?
City.
So, okay, so if something like that happens, the city will, if a landowner building on a lot takes down some trees,
Yeah.
and they need to be replaced, since he came in with a permit to say take them down, then you'll make him replace it.
That's right, and it relates back to some of the issues that have been raised about CC&Rs and private agreements. We don't enforce those, and so to the extent that the tree preservation requirements are established as conditions of approval, the city becomes the entity with enforcement authority.
Now, I understand the enforcement. The problem is when I read a lot of these, and even when I get back all to issue 9 that we approved, but on page 27, there's still a reference. I don't want to go back to that, but there's a reference there that the applicant will have these things done on the CC&Rs and blah, blah, blah. But we never see any CC&Rs, but at the same time, if he puts a note in, it becomes a condition of approval. But if he mentions he'll do this on CC&Rs, it'll be done, we don't do anything. So I'm just trying to say, I'm a little upset with that, because it's just saying this will be done then, but that doesn't mean it will be. That's my problem.
I think it's important for the commission to understand that this decision does not rely on the substance of any CC&Rs. They're not part of the record, and so the decision needs to stand on the evidence and the conditions of approval and so to the extent that concepts about tree preservation or design or anything might have been or could be discussed in future CC&Rs, they're really not relevant to this decision. It was mentioned in the hearings official's decision. It was meant because the applicant had mentioned it, but we made these conditions based on the applicant's proposal and the evidence we had, not on CC&Rs.
I understand, but I'm trying to clear, if the applicant mentioned it, then it's in the record, isn't it?
The fact that they intend to establish CCNRs, yes.
So we
What's
just
in there, we
ignore
don't
it.
know.
We just ignore it, even though it's in the record that he said he would do this.
Well, we don't have the actual CCNRs, so we can't rely on them.
I understand, but he said he would develop them then. Doesn't he have to come back with another phase of the PUD and another, through this thing?
The CCNRs are not a requirement as a condition of approval related to any criteria. So it's voluntary on their part, and it's more, I think, an interest between owners to establish rules that go perhaps above and beyond what the city would require.
Every PUD I bought into already had CCRs that the developer put in.
I think it's a reasonable expectation that they will have them, but again, not subject to city enforcement.
I'm not saying enforcement, I'm saying, are they required to submit that they have them, and then they can go about enforcing them? But you're saying there's not any requirement that they have them.
That's right.
Commissioner Baker.
Well, yeah, my question is about the tree preservation plan. Is that going to show significant trees that are on the individual lots?
Yes, we have an exhaustive inventory with, as far as I know,
Okay, because
every
that-
tree.
That was my concern. So then, how is that tree preservation plan enforced when you do a building permit?
Well, it's evaluated on a lot-by-lot basis and weighed against or reviewed. So an individual building permit for a house would have a site plan, it would show the location, and these conditions require that they then evaluate, and we would look at the approved PUD plans for tree preservation areas, trees within those. We've even added conditions that relate to a temporary construction fence 10 feet beyond that in order to
That's
minimize.
good.
So we'll be looking at the approved PUD plans to make sure the building permits comply with it.
But what about,
They have a map that shows the trees, so when you submit for a building permit, that's compared to what's on
okay,
file.
so that's submitted as
Yeah.
part of the application?
Oh, absolutely,
Been
yes.
there, done that.
Yeah.
That was, it's not clear what happens when you get to the lot level.
And we'll look at each individual lot, each home over the course of time to weigh it against that evidence, yeah.
Okay.
Replacements are 2 to 1.
Right.
Anybody else have any issues on appeal issue number 16? All those affirming the hearing's official decision? Okay, 5-0. 17, cul-de-sacs and emergency vehicle turnaround.
Yeah. The hearing's official erred in allowing the final 125 feet of Capitol Drive to remain unimproved, causing unsafe conditions. I'm going to go back to the,
Site plan?
yeah,
Yeah.
oops, I went the wrong way. Don't get dizzy looking at the screen. Okay, so, make this clear. This is the existing Capitol Drive right now. The blue areas are the areas that they intend to improve by extending it with pavement, and you can see a little bit of blue areas here and here where they're widening Capitol Drive all the way from here. When they get to right here, the improvement ends. This is currently unimproved roadway right now. So they would just stop right here. This lot, I think there's a driveway that comes right through here, and there might be one right here. I can't, it's hard to see on this screen. These are houses that are already built. They would still have their access. This part would remain. And so the appellants are arguing that this should have been improved all the way to the end. There.
Commissioner Taylor.
Nick, you already nicely explained where that barrier is going to be. Obviously, it's not going to, the barrier is going to be outside of anybody's access to this road, whether it's paved or gravelled.
Correct.
Unimproved.
There will be, yeah. it
So
will-
the unimproved section, can you remind me, I just can't remember, and I didn't write it in my notes. My memory, the gravel is going to be prepared so that emergency vehicles can actually go onto the gravel, or it's going to just remain
Well,
as
they would,
is?
an emergency vehicle, I guess, yeah, well, just like they would now,
Okay,
To the
great.
barrier.
yeah.
Okay,
I believe when we drove up there in the fire truck, we actually went on a little portion of it.
okay.
And then they turned around, backed up, basically, to turn around, so.
Mr. Baker?
I'm a little confused now. I thought essentially it would be paved to the blue area and then there'd be a barrier. Is that
The
correct?
barrier will be between the end of the improvement and beyond the last driveway access to the unimproved area. So
So we're going to cut off access to.
we're not cutting off access to anybody. I think, yes, this is a driveway right here that hooks in right here. There will also be a driveway from this lot somewhere, probably in this area, and that barrier would be somewhere between this point and wherever that last driveway comes in.
And
As
it,
a way to just signal anybody who's never driven up here before, and they happen to find themselves going this way, midnight or something, they don't drive into Hendricks Park accidentally. That's the intent of the barrier.
and there is mention in the findings that we provided, at least in draft format, that'll be reviewed as part of the privately engineered public improvement permit in terms of the precise location of the barricade. And so our city engineers and the fire marshal will be looking closely at this scenario to make sure that access is not cut off, that adequate emergency access is provided. And so that's captured in the condition of approval related to the construction of Capitol Drive.
Thank you.
I'm just wondering why they wouldn't have just done the improvements up to the barrier. Is there a reason why it's not being, I mean, everywhere else along the PUD, it's required to improve the street, and they're saying that we don't have to do the last 75 feet. I don't understand why.
We'd have to look back, but
Yeah.
I'm trying to recall the sequence of events. You know, originally they showed an emergency turnaround on
Remember that.
Lot 1. They revised the plan and pulled that back, but still had conversations with the fire marshal to make sure that their 150-foot distance would be met. And I think we realized that based on street connectivity standards, there was a requirement for a barricade. And so that requirement came later in the process. And so the precise location hasn't really been determined by the applicant's proposal. Does that make sense?
Is the blue area there, is that the 150, do you think that's 150 feet? And at the end, that's why it kind of,
Yeah, the way I understand it, it's 150, if they drive to the end of that improvement, they allow a backup of 150 feet, which would be the little intersection there.
all right.
And then from that point, they can lay line another 150 feet, and they figured out they had the ability to get to that last lot doing that, both in the other lot that's not part of this subdivision.
Mr. Baker, did you have your hand up again?
Yeah, this just seems strange to me. I mean, normally when you develop lots, you have a paved street to it. You know, when's the last time we allowed development where you only have gravel roads to the lots? Now, I can understand the issue with the 150 feet. It seems to me there might have been some other way to mitigate that,
So
fire issue by,
I think,
building a turnaround at
I think
at one
the
of the
the
property
issue is
lines.
the turnaround.
I know,
And
but building a turnaround at one of the property lines or something, just doesn't seem to me like it.
So when they had the other turnaround, and it was between those last two lots, it required like some massive cutting into, because those properties rise up above Capitol Drive, and they were going to have to cut into the ground, big retaining walls, and so you start losing more trees, things like that. And so if you limit that improvement to the 150 feet, you don't have to put the turnaround in. If you went beyond the 150 feet, you have to put the turnaround back in,
That's why.
which then takes away from the properties and causes ground disturbance.
Yeah.
Yeah, and
The turning radius of the fire truck is.
Yeah, it was a hammerhead that they showed. And
Now it makes sense to me why they do it.
I understand it, it's just, I
Yeah.
mean, here we are, this is a high-end development, and we're saying that we're allowing a couple of lots to not be served by pavement and/or sidewalks or whatever.
I think it's because by serving it with the pavement, you end up cutting
Having to
in
have
so
that.
much that it's
You'd have to have the hammerhead.
even worse.
It actually goes to some of the criteria in the South Hill study about minimizing grading impacts.
But it seems to me that maybe you could have negotiated with the fire department, and they would have allowed you to do this for that reason, because, you know, the option would be, you know,
Well, we had a lot of discussion with them, that never came up.
Commissioner Taylor, and then Jaworski.
No, actually, that answered my question. I was going to say there are codes, I mean, getting it, Commissioner Baker's concern is that it's a good question in terms of improvements, public improvements when a lot is developed. But it makes sense in terms of the other criteria involving the refinement plan. It's interesting, I was thinking about it like irrevocable petition or something, but it obviously has a reason behind it. So,
Commissioner Jaworski.
actually rooted in the policies.
I'll talk to that later on sidewalks. I don't understand, if that last lot is developed and they build a house there, they're gonna have to put a driveway in to get there. You got the same grading issue, don't you?
Different.
Well, I would,
Driveway is much smaller than a road turnaround for a fire truck, yeah.
there's frankly no minimum standard for a single-family dwelling's driveway, so,
I don't
I mean, in
understand.
terms
So
of
if
its...
it's ungraded, how's the fire truck? The fire truck says it can reach that end house by stopping on the blue road?
Yes.
That's what it says.
Laying the hooks, yeah.
So why don't they pave it anyway, and the fire truck stop at the blue line, put a blue line there,
And they
stop
have to
here?
Back up too far.
No, he's going in the same distance, only go in the 150 feet, even though the rest is paved. I mean, I don't understand it. I mean, it just makes no sense to me. If I can only go in 150 feet, I'll go in 150 feet. If the rest is paved, it's irrelevant. I'm not using it. I'm stopping here because they're saying they can stop there and get to that house.
Well, some of
That's what I
it's-
don't understand.
I mean, isn't some of it kind of code criteria, which is really what they're looking at, versus what actually the fire truck's going to do?
You're saying that if it was longer than 150 feet, regardless
to
of where
put
the
the
fire
hammer.
truck went, they'd have to put a turnaround
Yes. By
That's why we're
code.
doing it. Okay,
or a hammerhead.
Yeah, well, yeah,
right,
same thing, yeah.
okay. All right. Are we ready to vote on this? All those that, to affirm the hearing's official decision? 5. Okay. Appeal issue 18, adequate transportation system.
Okay. Well, this is where it should get interesting, right? Hearing's official erred in finding that the development will provide safe and adequate transportation systems for pedestrians and bikes. And hearing's official went at length in the decision to talk about that issue. I'm not going to try to
Sure.
bring it all up. It's multiple pages, but I think what you've got is information from our Public Works Department about the safety and the adequate system, and I'm just going to leave it at that.
Yeah.
Let you guys tackle this.
All right, I'll open this up, Commissioner Jaworski.
Once he builds these, does the city accept these as streets?
So, you mean Capitol Drive?
Everything he's building there per street?
So, well, that's an important clarification. So, Cupola Drive is proposed as a private street, so the city would not accept ownership of that.
Piece,
That's
right?
the yellow part.
That's right. So that's the internal private road that loops through the site and provides access to, I'd say, a majority of the lots. Capitol Drive is existing public right-of-way, and they'll be required to build it up to city standard for the length along the frontage of the property there that's shown in color. And so as a result of the privately engineered public improvement permit process, that gets constructed by the developer and then ultimately accepted or inspected and and accepted by the city if it meets our standards. So yes, it will become public in perpetuity after that.
So why didn't the Transportation Department bring in its thing about complete streets and all that, and walkability, and say that those last few lots, irregardless of what it's going to cost a developer, should be paved and have sidewalks? I don't understand that, because I thought that's what the complete street policy that they put out was, that they want to complete streets. They want to make them all safe and walkable.
I don't know that I can answer that as far as what they were thinking or why they didn't bring that in. So,
If when I get to
Imagine it's 'cause our
19,
criteria haven't caught up to the policies at this point. Yeah. So you're referring to a policy in the Eugene's Transportation System Plan
okay.
that doesn't apply to land use applications,
applies to streets, though.
but it doesn't apply to land use applications. The city may use it when they are upgrading streets through the capital projects, but at this point, the land use code has not been revised to be consistent or to implement the transportation system plan. So that's something that Public Works is working on, is an implementation plan, and have been asked to bring that back to council. But at this point, our code hasn't been revised to be able to implement that as intended.
If I understand what you said, then it doesn't apply, but the same thing, once the city accepts it, they're going to be required to bring it up to those standards. So it's going to cost the city to finish that street.
I think what Alyssa's referring to is capital projects where the city undertakes the full design and construction of a particular street segment. That's not the case here. And so I don't know if or when the city would assume responsibility for adding those
Typically don't for a
additional
local street.
elements, and particularly not for local streets as opposed to arterial or collectors. But
If a suggestion of an irrevocable trust comes in later, let's say on another condition or another issue, would it impact this guy, and that guy would be responsible for paying for the upgrade of that street?
so my understanding is there's no irrevocable petition being required for the segment at the end of the Capitol Drive where it abuts Lot 1 and 2. So there would be no petition obligating future
So the
owner
city
to construct
can
that.
either make you repair sidewalks and streets or not make you, is what you're saying. For some residents, they don't have to do it, and others, they have to do it.
It's situational and depends on the application at hand.
Thank you.
Who was next? I'm sorry, Commissioner Baker.
Well, I'm looking at these comments from the fire marshal dated 2/2018. The last sentence of the first section says, Capitol Hill Road will now dead end, but this dead end road will not exceed 150 feet, thus removing the requirement for an acceptable apparatus turnaround. It doesn't really state that the barrier is 150 feet farther. It says the road will end there.
Yeah. He's simply confirming what the code requires, which is that the dead-end portion of Capitol Drive won't be longer than 150 feet, in which case an emergency turnaround is not required. And so the applicant then responded by removing that turnaround from their plan.
Just it's not clearly stated there.
So, Commissioner Baker, what I think we'll end up having staff confirm, when Lot 1 goes in for their development permit, when that particular owner, that is going to be something they assess. Where that house is located needs to be located in a location that it's within the hose length distance per the code, so that the fire marshal, so that fire truck can serve, the emergency vehicles can serve that lot, so, yeah.
And if not, and they can't serve it, then that house would probably have to be fire sprinkled.
Yeah, they're all going to be sprinkled.
All of them are going to be sprinkled.
Well, that's another issue
It's a condition. It's a condition.
that I wanted to.
That's later on.
Yes,
We're
later
back, but we're talking about safe and adequate transportation right now, not life safety. So what the applicants are saying has to do with the little section down there on the turn, that there's no sidewalk provided. Is that kind of what?
So they're arguing
Bigger
that
than that.
there's no requirement for sidewalk all the way down Capitol Drive to where it meets Spring Boulevard.
Right, and
I-
so can we talk,
Well,
I'm going to ask our attorney, isn't there a Dolan or something that we've built? I recall dealing with something like this on a different appeal issue that I won't bring up, but isn't there a case law that says that a development isn't required to improve the thing further off of their property?
If you're asking a developer to do an, excuse me, to do an offsite improvement, then the city would need to be able to make findings that the improvements are, I'm going to forget the verbiage, but roughly proportional to the impact of the development, and that they are kind of necessary because of the development. And that is a pretty hard sell the farther off-site you get with those improvements, to be able to say that it's the development creating the impact. And as far as I understand, we don't have a condition of approval now. The city hasn't created those Dolan findings. So if the commission wanted to move in that direction, we would need to staff would need to do that. And I haven't done the analysis at this point to be able to say with confidence that we could make defensible findings. And I have some concerns about that, frankly.
And that's kind of where I'm going. In what I saw, in what was presented by the Neighborhood Response Committee, it would have had to be a much more robust Dolan type of an argument for me to say that, yes, that this developer has to put sidewalks all the way down to the intersection. And I don't see that there, so. Commissioner Baker.
Yeah, I don't have an issue with the sidewalks. It's mainly just the fire department's report. Verify that the developed section of the road meets 20-foot wide unobstructed with reference. In other words, the road up to there. Has that been done, or is that part of the? Pardon?
I think it's
We're still on.
Commissioner Baker, I think that's the next appeal issue.
Okay.
This one is specifically 18, is specifically related to pedestrian and bike access and
Okay,
safety.
sorry.
Anybody have any problem affirming the hearings officials? Okay, all those in favor? Okay, so that's number 18.
I oppose.
Oh, you opposed? Okay, 4-1. All right, now we'll move on to 19.
Boy.
This one,
I'll jump in if you want.
yeah, go ahead. I'm going to go to the next slide. There's
Yeah.
so much up there that,
Yeah, well, so I think this is an accurate depiction of the standard that was referenced in the appeal related to the issue of paving width and sidewalks adjacent to lots, I believe, 18 and 19, which, if you could go back to the site plan, that would help. Just to show that it is essentially an isolated section of street that is not contiguous to the frontage of the primary frontage of the site on Capitol Drive. Nick's going to point it out.
see the
Right,
yellow
Here.
section right here,
yeah.
just fronting this part of the development.
Right. And so we looked at this a little more closely and realized that, in fact, the approval standard that was cited in Appeal Issue 19 relates to street width at EC 9.6870. It speaks to right-of-way and paving widths, but it doesn't actually provide or enable the city to make those requirements in the way that the public improvement standards do. So in actuality, 9.6505, streets and alleys, subsection 3, and then subsection 5 for sidewalks is where we would typically be looking at potential requirements for public improvements. And the situation here is that it is an isolated street section, not contiguous. So we'd have an unimproved piece between the main portion of the development site and the frontage along lots 18 and 19. And so scratching our heads a little bit about this and looking back in the record, we realized this issue was not addressed in the Public Works referral. We did not have information to go on in the staff report, and therefore the hearings official did not have that information with respect to potential conditions of approval, whether that would amount to Dolan findings to justify a roughly proportional impact and requiring them to improve it. We didn't have that to go on in the record. What we would typically do in a situation like this is require an irrevocable petition for future improvements, such that when there's a majority of abutting owners that are signed on to petitions, and if in the future there was an interest in further improving Capitol Drive, that we would have the ability to do that. So potentially, I think it could be added as a condition of approval, but it would be related to criteria that aren't addressed under this appeal issue. So we would be reaching to other parts of the code in order to address the substance of their concerns. And in effect, it would amount to widening the street along just that frontage and having a sidewalk on just that frontage that's disconnected from on either end. So, yeah.
Is there a concern with reaching in terms of the legal implications of reaching to other intersections?
I do have some concern about that, Commissioner Taylor. As the body may recall, we have specific code requirements that say that this body is limited to the appeal issues that are in front of you, and in other having to do with other applications that have been remanded to this body for kind of stepping outside of those appeal issues. So that is a possible concern. If the appeal issue is articulated in such a way that it could be read to encompass the appropriate approval criterion, gives me less heartburn. If the appeal issue is phrased in such a way that it is specifically directed to a code section that staff doesn't believe would allow you to kind of reach to another code section to pull a condition of approval, that is potentially a problem.
If I may, just to add, we looked at some potential language and trying to anticipate this discussion. I'm going to go ahead and read that. It's not before you in the materials you have. We looked at this today, but I mean, this is just a potential finding, worthy of maybe some more discussion. But however, the Planning Commission finds this issue was not sufficiently raised such that the hearings official could address it, or to otherwise justify additional exactions at this stage of the process. Furthermore, the requirement for such improvements would need to be made under EC 9.6505 for streets and alleys and subsection 5 for sidewalks, which are not raised in the appeal. So I think there's really two ways to go about this. Is either to reach to those criteria and potentially require an irrevocable petition, or essentially dismiss it because it wasn't sufficiently raised. I mean, so there are two options that staff sees.
But note it, like you have, but provided in our findings to bring attention to it.
Right.
So I put myself in the queue, and I have a couple questions. On your staff report, not the big staff report, but the one in our AS, on page 35 near the top, there's a thing that says, however, there was no requirement made for street improvements along the frontage, which is typical for short segments that would be disconnected from fully improved streets, such as along the primary frontage of Capitol Drive. Can you tell me where in the record that you drew that conclusion from? I mean, to me, that sounds like an opinion from staff, and doesn't staff opinions have to be drawn from the record?
Fair enough, yeah. I'm not sure exactly where a reference to an irrevocable petition was included in the record, so I think if anything,
This goes even before the remedy. This goes to, you're saying, you're bringing up, this happens other places, and we've seen this happen other places, but I don't know where in the record that is there for me to base my conclusion on. So I'm hesitant to use that section because I see that as an appealable area. As far as if we decided to put a condition on this, either an irrevocable trust or to have them develop the sidewalks and widen the street, I think that could be fit in under the one right above it as safe for pedestrians and bikes. If you said you have to widen that street and put the sidewalk on for that 75 feet or whatever it is, I think you could, in my opinion, that could be as far as for pedestrians and bikes.
so in other words, you're supportive of the idea of requiring an irrevocable petition for that frontage? Is that?
Or building it,
Or
having them build it out,
Right.
even though it seems fragmented.
Right. And if we did that, I think we would, it required the build-out, we would need to provide constitutional findings to justify the exaction, and that's where,
It's within the PUD.
well, but we still need to justify it as being roughly proportional to the impact of the development, to having a legitimate government interest in doing that. I
Okay.
think
I thought-
conceptually we could do that,
I
but
thought that they had they had to improve anywhere that was in the, okay, then, okay.
no, there'd be more work to do between now and Thursday to try to craft that, but.
All right, I'll let other
The
people speak.
irrevocable doesn't require that.
So again, my question was whether that street is 20 feet, because if it's not, it certainly doesn't meet the fire marshal's concern.
Right, so a third option would be to find that the hearings official erred by not addressing it, not requiring that it be improved. And so we would, if there's a majority of commissioners that are interested in adding that public improvement requirement to the application as a condition of approval, we would have to provide what we call Dolan findings to justify it and include that in your final order. That would also then mean that the applicant has to construct that segment to a width of at least, I think, what does the appeal issue say, 21 feet?
20
With a
The fire
5-foot
marshal-
sidewalk.
Fire marshal says 20 feet.
Well, but this,
With a standard, in this case, would require 21 feet. And so, I mean, in theory, we could do that. I'm going to look to Lauren to see, I mean, we would have to do that analysis and have the findings added to the final order by Thursday.
That's accurate. And
I mean, the other alternative is to say that the application doesn't meet the criteria and therefore should be denied. I mean, just to put it all out there.
Commissioner Jaworski.
The applicant was required to widen things and put sidewalks in elsewhere, right? The applicant had to put some sidewalks.
Well, absolutely, along the frontage that's in color there of Capitol Drive, that'll be fully improved.
Well, if this is still in the same subdivision, I don't know why it needs additional criteria to justify it. The same
Well-
thing that justifies it there justifies it down there.
And it may be, I mean, I would have to have legal counsel look at whether or not, or to what degree we would have to modify the findings to reach to the frontage here. The frontage here, in, lots, what is it, 18 and 19, was not included in the analysis originally. And so I think the question is, what would it take for us to wrap that in and make the requirement? It may be a simple change based on that. I think the concern would be more related to a situation where we would be extending public improvements along the frontage of those intervening properties that aren't owned by the applicant, and that's not what I'm hearing the commission or the appeal issue as raising. It would just be this isolated section of street that has to be widened.
It may not need more right-of-way, so.
Well, I think it's a 50-foot wide right-of-way. I think there's plenty of room.
I know it looks ridiculous to have a widened street and a sidewalk just right there, but we have it up on Gillum where they're requiring it, where they don't complete the sidewalk, so I don't have an issue in saying the developer should put that in and
Okay.
make it a requirement.
Commissioner Randall.
What is Capitol Drive between this area and the proposed new area? How is it improved?
It's about 18 and a half feet, depending.
Paved
Yeah.
with sidewalks or
No.
without?
No.
So no sidewalks, 18, 19 feet paved. And this little section here is
I
currently.
think it's currently 18 right there.
Okay.
I didn't go out and measure, but I asked Public Works recently.
I think I lean toward an irrevocable petition.
Commissioner Jaworski.
This one also, to me, when I looked at it, that it's narrower, it also creates a safety factor because it's a curve. And if you're coming around a narrow curve, you might want to have not people walking in the street. And even if there only is a sidewalk for that short distance, it allows them to get out of the way during the curve, and then it's a straightaway again after that.
Mr. Baker.
And again, my concern is the fire marshal who says he wants, developed sections of the road to meet 20-foot minimum unobstructed for his vehicles. And even, he goes on to say it's still going to be a problem to serve that, and it may very well be that, they send 2 trucks and half the people may have to walk to the fire.
Yes.
It doesn't seem that much of a stretch to me.
Commissioner Taylor.
I really don't want something remanded, so I'd love to not stretch, especially if legal counsel's, Lauren, if you're concerned about it. I do think that we kind of have to address this to some degree. It's not, the hearings official goes into it to some degree, but doesn't really, like you said, doesn't really address it. So even though it's awkward, I guess maybe what I'd recommend is it helpful if you have a couple days and we talk about it on Thursday, based on our concern, unless there's somebody.
I think we need to nail it down more than that, because if they have to rewrite on Thursday, that's not going to happen.
So based on comments, what I feel like I'm hearing is that there's some interest or some thought that appeal issue 18 and 20 may both apply here, that the approval criteria for safe and adequate transportation systems for pedestrians and bikes based on street width and sidewalk, and then also significant risk to public health and safety or an impediment to emergency response, perhaps goes to the fire marshal's comments. So it appears to me that Planning Commission has identified some approval criteria that are called out in some of the appeal issues, just not this particular one. So if Planning Commission is interested in that type of a condition, staff can try to write it to address those appeal issues rather than specifically appeal issue 19 in that. And then in terms of, can we make adequate Dolan findings, we'll let you know on Thursday. We'll bring back what we can do.
Commissioner Jaworski.
I like what legal is saying, that we address the issue wherever it is, but I think that the problem that I'm seeing is here, that I'm hearing from other commissioners, is some think that the property owner should pay for it, and others think the developer should do it when he's developing the proposal. Is that what I'm hearing?
Well, the difference between an irrevocable petition and a requirement to improve it now is that the petition would defer that cost and obligation to a future owner, as you're suggesting, and that to require it now would be the obligation of the developer as part of their privately engineered public improvements. And it would get built now rather than later.
So for me, it's not the cost. For me, it's the applicable criteria and whether or not 18 and 20 are met. And I can kind of agree with, we can't say to them that you have to improve Capitol Drive on sections that are outside the PUD, and we can't say that you have to come do it all the way down to the 5 intersection things. But in my opinion, and I'm not a lawyer, But in my opinion, we do have the right to say that areas that are within the PUD, which that section is in yellow because it's part, it abuts where the PUD is, and there's going to be driveways coming out of there, that we should require 21 feet and sidewalks. And if we have to do Dolan findings, I think that that's appropriate. That's my opinion.
That's where I'm leaning, as obvious been said, so.
Anybody else want to weigh in?
I think from my perspective, if the rest of Capitol Drive in that area, granted, the upper part, we're improving sidewalks, all of that, but this part down here, I don't see how you can get to it being any more of an impediment to emergency response than the rest of Capitol Drive in that area, the way it is now. So I'm thinking that's where the irrevocable petition, to me, seems to make more sense than requiring the improvement just on that short little piece.
Mr. Baker, and then I can answer.
I'm leaning towards supporting Commissioner Borofsky. I think it should have been part of the original proposal, seems to me. We can't really require it, if we can't really require it in parts of the street that are not under the control of the developer or abut the developer's property. Even though the fire marshal says it's really a challenge to serve that area. So, but I think wherever we can, and because there are driveways there, it seems like it should be part of the development.
So I've got myself kind of to answer some of these. Yeah, for me, it goes to 18, and it's the safe and adequate transportation system for pedestrians and bikes. It's a blind corner. It was brought up in public testimony. There's a driveway coming in there. It's been purported to be already a dangerous or a hazardous corner, although there's no accident studies to back that up, but there was plenty of testimony to that effect. Adding a driveway to that, I think that by putting a sidewalk and making the street 21 feet wide goes to help make it provide safe and adequate transportation for pedestrian within a corner. So that's where I would put it, is in number 18. And if you're doing it, it would have to go to 21 anyways, because that's the street standard. Commissioner?
I was just going to say, I support legal counsel's approach, and I'm open to a revocable permit as a potential solution. I want it to fit within what we have in front of us, the appeal items, and I don't have the information that you will need to look at before we come back on Thursday. So, but generally I'm just not as narrowly focused, because we just don't know how. We want to make sure we're giving a solid, defendable approach.
So in order to help staff bring you back something on Thursday, I could use a little bit of clarification. I'm hearing from, I believe, Commissioner Taylor and Commissioner Randall that you're leaning toward an irrevocable.
Either.
Okay.
Any. That's my perspective.
And then other commissioners, I feel like you're leaning toward
Right.
developer build it now.
So let's take a vote at this point so that we can move on with direction. So those who are in favor of bringing it up to sidewalk and 21-foot standards, raise their hand. And then,
Well, how though? Okay.
well, I'm just kind of getting,
Okay.
so that we can move on to that next level. And then those opposed to that.
I'm not necessarily opposed. I just want it to be defendable.
And I
Okay.
guess I'm not opposed to it
Yeah,
as an
I'm
irrevocable
not.
petition, but I'm opposed to it now.
Okay. So we've got 3-2 that say, try and bring us back findings that would get it improved to 21 feet and a sidewalk.
And so basically, I support that. It's just how it's done. I just want to make sure it's defensible.
Right.
That's it.
And if you come back and say it's not defensible, we can relook at that. But that's the direction that I would like you to go, if that's clear enough. And Commissioner Jaworski?
Yeah, I've only been on this for a few years, and I've never seen anything that's solid, concrete, defensible. So I'm not worried about it, to be honest with you, because things get appealed, they get appealed. I just kind of feel we should do the right thing, so. I don't see it necessarily only as fire marshal stuff. I just see it as a safety issue for pedestrian people. Well, everything that does with that. A big curve like that, I can't believe that transportation let that get by, so.
Do you have enough from us?
I think so. Yeah, thank you.
And again, if it goes into 18, if it goes into 19, if it goes into 20, wherever you feel it, whichever criteria you think is where it should be addressed, I yield that to the legal staff.
19 is where it should go.
Yeah, 20 is on something different.
Well, the findings that we bring back to you will be clear about which approval criterion, staff believes it makes sense to put in under based on commission's discussion, and we'll let you know, if in the process of trying to draft the findings, any big concerns come up, I will certainly talk to you about those on Thursday.
Before you get rid of that map, could I just ask one quick question?
Yeah.
Only because I can't get a scale, excuse me.
Yeah. Oh,
How long is that?
Hold on.
Hold on. There you
Coming
go.
back.
Go back.
Here we go.
How long is that?
How long is this here? Is it more than 150 feet?
Can't,
is what I'm
no,
trying
because
to
it's
get
not
at.
longer than the blue, really.
It's longer than the others on
it
that
might
scale.
be 150 feet, but they could drive partway down it and still back up to where they can turn around, I think is how they look at it.
So it
Because
doesn't
it's a
have.
private driveway, so it's got different standards.
Yeah, it does, it looks like, I need a really big magnifying glass, but it does look like they've segmented the dimensions to note that basically where that is, and then demonstrating where the emergency vehicle stops at 150.
And again, my understanding is the fire marshal evaluated that, looked at the 150-foot standard, plus their ability to drag hose for the, to the distance of a likely dwelling. That'll be reviewed at time of building permit as well, and make sure it meets fire code.
So my question is, did we find that the hearings official erred on 19, and we are going to fix it with a condition? I just don't.
I think you haven't made that determination yet. I think on Thursday we'll bring you back a proposed condition, and if you decide to accept it, it would be something similar to what you did earlier today, where you affirm the hearings official's decision with a modified condition of approval.
Okay. All right. Thank you. So now we're on to number 20.
Yeah. I was trying to make a duplicate slide and put it way down.
Right.
so I don't have to go
Oh,
back.
dang it.
I think on 20, as far as the soil erosion portions, I think we've covered that in the geotech requirements. And I think Thursday we will cover the emergency response.
Commissioner Baker.
The only thing, could you put the drawing back on?
What do you want?
Drawing.
The drawing. I just leave the drawing.
Yeah.
Back to
I'm
the
gonna
site
copy
plan.
again. I just,
I have a bunch of copies.
Okay.
Okay.
Oh,
The
actually,
main
that would be a good
question
idea.
is-
They're not all the same,
they-
meaning
That's okay.
they have the same information.
So emergency vehicles can come in either via Cresta de Ruta or Capitol Drive, is that the way it works?
The preferred route is up Capitol Drive. Yes, you can get to it from Cresta de Ruta, but it's even more challenging with the turns and then when you come down Cresta de Ruta, they can't make that turn efficiently. So I'd say that in most cases, they will come up Capitol Drive unless there's some type of impediment, like a landslide or something, then they would have to do it the other way.
I'd point out, this is partially probably my fault for causing confusion, but the approval criterion that is pointed out in this appeal issue includes impediments to emergency response, but the appeal issue itself is focused on erosion. So what we are talking about in this particular appeal issue is the erosion portion of that approval criterion and not so much the other portions.
but it says, or an impediment to emergency response.
Right, that is the approval criteria in the code, but we also have to look at the appeal issue itself. And the appeal issue, while it references that approval criteria, the whole appeal issue talks about soil erosion. It doesn't talk about being an impediment to
Appeal
erosion.
issue 21 actually will get to
So
that
that
topic.
kind of goes to that statement of you need to raise it to specific specificity as to go to the criteria. And in this one, they didn't raise the fire. In this one, they raised the soil.
Right.
Yeah, for me, I'm fine with the spreaders and the catch basins that keep it there.
I concur with that. I agree. The hearings official didn't know.
All right. All those in favor? Okay, 5-0 on 20. 21 is risk to public health.
Well, it's actually, I think this one's the impediment, right? This is the impediment to emergency response.
Okay, so this is where he raised it.
Looks
Yeah.
like it. Yes.
Yeah, so, let's see.
We're at what, appeal issue 20, yeah, it's the same,
Yeah, I just go back to the
Same
your site plan,
criteria,
frankly.
just different.
back site plan?
Yeah, just-
See, now I got it right there, okay. Hopefully, this mouse is just not
So,
responding.
Again, my question on this one, and that was raised, and this is a subjective term. So if you go to the fire marshal's report, as is stated, it says it will be improved, and the criteria, and what the response committee is saying is, will it be adequate? You know, and so I didn't see in, and I may not have seen it in the fire report, but I never saw the word adequate in the fire report. So maybe I'm not seeing it and it's someplace else in the record, but I had to go back and it was on page 400 not the record, of the staff report is where I ended up finding it. So just if somebody could talk to me about that, parsing what is considered adequate.
Well, I think too, I guess I would just turn the commission's attention back to the wording of the actual approval criterion, which is that the PUD will not be an impediment to emergency response. And so the question then is whether the commission believes that the PUD will be an impediment to emergency response, whatever that means. I think that if I had to try to parse the appellant's argument, it appears to be that they're saying, well, the second round of fire marshal comments indicated that access to the PUD would be improved, but it's not clear that that means that access to the PUD will actually be adequate for the fire marshal to respond. We've got a lot of different verbiage floating around, but what Planning Commission needs to look at is the approval criterion itself, and that is there an impediment to emergency response?
Criteria says impediment, or this,
Yes.
Impediment.
okay, now that's helpful then. Other comments?
On that single issue within the appeal, or?
No, just on appeal issue 21.
Yeah, I'm trying to find, it says, in the staff comments on 38, it indicates the requirement to sprinkle new residential units. I can't find a hearings official where they said you'd be required to have sprinkling units. Did the hearings official make that comment?
No.
My understanding is it's not a condition of approval. It's relating to a fire code requirement that it be implemented at the time of building permit. But my understanding, and Nick, correct me if I'm wrong, is that the applicant's proposing to sprinkler the units. And that to the extent that they're required to sprinkler the units, that would be determined based on factors under the fire code, not specific to the the land use code.
But the applicant's not building the unit, so how can they guarantee they're going to sprinkle the units? I got confused on how, when I started to read, it said that the fire people will look at this. It's not a requirement that it be sprinkled.
So,
You know, are you saying the fire marshal has already said in this development that when he looks at all the sites, he's going to require they be sprinkled?
and that's directly related to, you can't get
Fire marshal
the
go.
water pressure into the fire hydrants that you typically would need for a development. So, say for example, a fire hydrant has to have 1,000 gallons per minute or something that comes out of it. In this case, they're saying they can only get 500 even with the improvements. And when you do that, then you're forced to provide sprinklers in
So
the houses.
I just want to make sure, it's in the
So every-
record
Yes.
that the fire marshal will enforce and say they have to have sprinklers.
That's reviewed at every single-family home that comes in. As part of that review is the fire marshal's office looks at that.
I just want to point out that that's actually the next appeal issue. It
Right.
is related, obviously, to that, but that's, the issue of sprinklers comes up in 22.
Right, and
Yeah, it's mentioned in 21, and it comes up in 22.
Is it mentioned in 21?
It is mentioned.
Well,
Okay.
right, and
Okay.
again, to
My
relate
bad.
back to the criterion here, we're talking about impediment to emergency response, not
So-
necessarily water supply. But
Right.
I wanted to point out in the hearings, or the, the fire marshal's referral comments, a section that says, water supply okay with the existing 2 fire hydrants and 2 new proposed hydrants, and all new developed homes having automatic sprinkler systems complying with Chapter 9 Fire Protection Systems of the 2014 Eugene Fire Code, et cetera, et cetera. So it's referring to, or at least assuming, that sprinklers will be provided in all of the homes, and that would meet the fire code. So that's a matter of record. So,
Commissioner B.
And that was my concern, is that the fire marshal made that determination, but there's no condition that has a requirement that requires the units to be sprinkled.
And I think,
And even though the developer has agreed to do it, he could change his mind later on. It's not part of the acceptance criteria for the PUD.
Sure. And I think just a brief response, if I may, from staff is, this issue's come up before in other cases, and there's, I think, a real clear distinction between the fire code and the land use code. And so if there was an intention on the part of the majority of commissioners to require fire sprinklers for every unit, we would need to know where you think that authority exists under the code criteria.
Plus, I'd point out, it's not going to be the developer building the individual homes. It will be individual homeowners, so that the developer won't be able to renege on anything.
No, I know that, I said that, yeah, I'm just saying, I just wanted to make sure that the fire marshal is concrete, not we get a new fire marshal and he interprets it differently or something.
Well, I think they follow codes.
Okay,
Like we,
well.
I mean, they follow their codes. I
I
feel
think
confident.
related to Appeal Issue 21, I would affirm the hearings official that it is not, the PUD is not an impediment to emergency response. When it gets to fire sprinklers, we've got that in 22, and
Yeah.
I think it's pretty clear there how to respond, but I'll hold that till we get there.
Okay. Anybody else? All right, how do we vote that to affirm the hearings official's decision on 21? Okay, 5-0. 22, we're moving through here, you guys.
22 is the issue we were just talking
Break
about.
after 22, just a quick stretch, and anybody needs to use the restroom.
All right. 22, did not require fire sprinklers.
I skipped 22, but
Because there's not a,
That's all right. Commissioner,
actually, it doesn't have any criteria. really.
Well-
Well, and I think,
Yeah.
do you want to go first? Or do you-
I think that as a continuation of the conversation under criterion 6, if you look at the language closely enough, it says that the PUD will not be a significant risk to public health and safety, including but not limited to soil erosion, slope failure, stormwater, or flood hazard, or an impediment to emergency response. So it's non-exhaustive. I mean, it could encompass other issues related to public health and safety. And so if the commission felt there was a desire, a need to, and justification under this criterion to make fire sprinklers a requirement, albeit born out of fire code, that this would be the only place I could think of under the criteria where it might fit. So.
And I guess on appeal issue 22, where I'm coming from, is it's pretty clear in here that from the fire marshal's review that you're not going to get adequate water pressure to not have fire sprinklers. We did a house up by Laurel with golf course, and they didn't have adequate water pressure. There wasn't a fire hydrant nearby, and so they have a large tank in their garage and fire sprinklers, and that was the criteria. That was the only way we could get the building permit. And I think you're going to have the same thing here. So it looks like, from what the fire marshal is saying and what I would imagine EWEB is saying, you can't get adequate water pressure to not require fire sprinklers. So he's going to get there by default. I don't see anything in the land use code that will require that. That's a building code, fire code issue. And I think it'll play itself out on its own. Now, if they could get adequate water pressure out there for some reason, then yeah, maybe you wouldn't have to do fire sprinklers, but it doesn't look like that's a possible scenario. So I'm not inclined to put it into 21 or, and I'm inclined to affirm 22.
Commissioner,
Yeah, I was going to say, I agree. I also, like Gabe said, I can see a potential condition because it says including but not limited to soil erosion, slope failure, stormwater, flood hazard, that it could be water pressure. So, I mean, I can see the potential maybe of getting there in terms of fire sprinklers. I'm not sure it's needed. So I agree with Commissioner Randall. I think it's not one of these things that are going to be overlooked essentially at each development. It's not
tree preservation plan.
Yeah, well, actually, this is even more significant because this is the fire marshal. But once again, I can potentially see a condition if that was.
okay, so but I put myself in the queue, and I'm just going to read from the fire marshal's thing under comments and conditions. Number 2, water supply, okay. A, with the existing 2 fire hydrants and 2 new proposed hydrants, all new developed homes having automatic sprinklers complying with Chapter 9 Fire Protection System, 2014 Fire Code, as specified in EC of March 1930. So he's saying in his statement that they're gonna be sprinkled. Mr. George.
Yeah. I tried to find specifically, how did they determine that it wouldn't get 1,000 gallons per minute? I mean, I've had developments where they put in pumping stations up on the development and they reach the pressure that you want. Now, how did they say this is not going to reach 1,000? Just based on they're trying to have the normal flow take this uphill? Is that what they said?
More or less. I mean, they had to talk to them about, they've got to upgrade it anyway, just to get to the 500, and I think it gets down to a cost factor probably, but I'm not,
Well, did
I mean,
anybody-
we didn't ask them, so I can't.
Well, I had to try to put sprinklers in one place in a home, and that's a big cost factor, and you multiply that by every home. Is that cost factor less than having an improved pumping station up at the development that'll bring the pressure up to what it is? I'm just asking a question.
Probably not in the
I don't know how to answer that.
It's not in the
That
record.
doesn't get to our criteria.
Yes, it does. It says it doesn't meet the thing, and I'm asking how does it not meet it?
Well-
They testified it's not going to meet it, but did they say how? Why?
But it's based on what's in the record.
Yeah, from EWEB.
We're just commenting that the cost issue, the question you had about the relative costs, is not one that's discussed in the record that we know of.
I have no way to judge that.
But obviously, it's a choice that the applicant is making with regard to their negotiations with the EWEB about the type of facility they'll need to use to construct, to upgrade. And as I understand it, in combination with a pump station and sprinklers, that they've satisfied the fire marshal.
So this comes through the code in the fire marshal. The property buyer doesn't know he has to put sprinklers in. Anything he builds, he finds out later. Is that what happens?
Yep.
Yeah. And I would assume that cost is passed on too, but I guess that's not in the record either.
Okay.
Mr. Baker, and then
Yeah, I always have a concern when we're depending on a condition that's not part of the criteria, where the fire marshal's saying this is needed, and the developer says he's doing it, but he could change his mind later on. I don't like that concept as a way of planning for the future. And I'm not so much concerned solely about water supply. I'm concerned that if there was a fire in there and you'd had to, people would leave that area, we have a problem. We have fire trucks trying to go up, we have people trying to come down, we have this narrow road with, without sidewalks most of the way, narrow and curvy. It's not even, doesn't even maybe meet the width in a lot of places. So my concerns are not solely water flow, but in the case of fire, what happens? People are going to flee that area, and that will be a problem. So the fire marshal says that the water supply is okay if you sprinkle those, and I think we should have that as a condition of the development. And we're requiring that, some other things, geotechnical, be applied to the individual lots, so we could do the same thing for the sprinkler.
Mr. Randall.
I would disagree with Commissioner Baker's comment that the developer could just change their mind later. You can't just do that. I mean, this is the fire code, and it's got to meet the fire code, so you can't just change your mind later. And again, it's not a land use code issue, it's a fire code issue. And so I would oppose putting that as a condition on this because it's already going to be there. And I think it's just adding another layer that isn't necessary.
Any other comments before we vote? Commissioner Baker?
Well, I wasn't aware that the fire marshal looks at every house building permit that goes into the city of
Oh, yeah.
Eugene.
Oh, yeah.
They do.
You bet.
Okay, all right, well, then I would feel differently if I knew that's happens, that's at the building permit level.
Yes, sir.
Yes.
Okay. All those in favor of affirming the hearing's official decision on number 22, raise your hand. Okay. And as was suggested, we're going to take a little break.
Can you state what I didn't know.
5-0. Yep.
There is if anybody's interested, there's a restroom code right up there by the door, and the restrooms are just out and to your left. I do think the outside doors are locked, so if you needed to go outside, make sure you have a friend inside still.
Yeah.
Buddy system.
Or any of us. Sorry, not dividing people.
Knock on the window.
come back to the table. We lost Nick, but he'll be here soon enough, I
We
think.
haven't lost him.
Just misplaced.
We just.
There he is, he's back. Okay, so as I see it, we are on 23. Where'd 23 go? 22.
It's the bottom of page 38. It's kind of
The
hidden.
bottom of the page.
Ah, there it is. Okay, number 23. Adequate public facilities.
This is related to
Oh, this is
water.
really, yeah, current compliance with the code relates to future availability, I have trouble with that word, of sufficient domestic and fire water flows to the proposed PUD, including a new off-site pump station, associated piping. Applicant will be responsible for cost of sharing the new system. This is in reference to the letter that was provided by the applicant from eWeb that talked about an agreement to work on cost sharing for the new pump system that would go in place. And just to acquaint yourself with it, there is a water tank and pump facility not too far from this property. However, the top of that water tank is below most of the home sites on this property. And so you get into an issue where you can't have gravity flow up into the top of that area. So they use a pumping system right now for the homes that are up there. So this development obviously would create such a demand that that pumping system has to be upgraded, and that's where a significant cost comes into play when you have to have very large pumps to get the water pressure up there to what would be needed for the addition of these home sites. So that's what that letter is about.
Okay. Commissioner?
I don't think the hearings official erred. I do have a question, and maybe I've overlooked it, and I'm not sure it's needed, but the very last sentence on page 40 in the current AIS is under Appeal Issue 23. Prior to the final subdivision approval, the applicant will need to provide documentation from eWeb ensuring adequate water service, and a condition of approval is imposed to ensure the standard is met. So that's why I'm going to affirm it. Now I'm looking because I didn't write which condition of approval it was, or what that was, and I just got to, I'm assuming it is condition of approval.
It's condition of approval number 13 in the hearings official's decision.
Perfect, there it is. Okay, so yeah.
Yep.
Right. Thank you. Okay.
Anybody else?
Commissioner Kane.
Okay. Anybody else?
With a tab on it. So, sorry,
Yes?
is there a
No, nobody?
Nope, you're good.
oh,
Okay, with that, I'm going to ask everybody in favor of affirming the hearing's official decision. Okay, 5-0. Now 24, adequate public facility.
hearings official erred in the determination that adequate public facilities and services are available to the site in regard to the existing street system serving the PUD. Seems oddly familiar, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And this one's related to the street
Yeah, this
system?
is- Yeah.
Commissioner Baker.
Well, the only thing that I would note here is that this one might be applicable to your work you're doing on,
Smaller segment.
Anybody else? Okay, so I think we'll say that we feel that the hearings official didn't err unless legal staff comes back and finds that this is the criteria that might fit best for our previous decision. Does that sound about right? Or do we just want to? Let's just, I'm going to say, let's say that the hearings official didn't err. I'm 24. All in favor? And if at some point you need to use this one to come back, that's an option. Yes.
So, oh, sorry, I forgot you were going to say I was already going to jump to 25?
25.
Okay. This one is regarding lot dimensions, and this is the one that's talking about the issue of the lots that have the private preservation areas and not including the preservation area in the lot coverage calculation. So I'm going to get out of here and get to something that we've come up with, a draft condition that we would add as number 21 that you see there highlighted in the middle of the screen. Pretty simple and straightforward. Actually using language right out of the hearings official's decision. Does that need any discussion?
Commissioner Randall.
I think that sounds fine. I had come up with wording to add to condition 11, which says lot 16 and 17 shall have the option of constructing up to 3 attached single-family structures. And then it goes on to say if only one single-family structure is proposed, that lot shall have maximum lot coverage. I was going to suggest that we put on, because I thought the question really was that it didn't apply to all the lots.
Was what?
50%, that there was a concern that the 50% didn't apply to all of the lots, is what I was reading.
And we figured that this was a relatively simple way to capture any lot that may include a preservation
That probably
area.
works better than what I was going to suggest, so I'm fine with that.
Me too. That was my comment in my notes.
Other questions? I have a question. So, maximum lot coverage is 50%. Does that include accessory dwelling units? Can you go over 50% if you have an accessory dwelling unit?
Well, the coverage definitely includes any dwellings or
Okay,
buildings.
so yeah, all right. And that was just a question outside there. So you can't, if you had anywhere in the city, you have to have the 50% is, well, or not anywhere. There's areas that it's less than that.
Right, and that term lot coverage is defined in the code, so
Right.
it's very clear.
Right, so,
Particular to R1, is that?
And when you say any preservation, just to clarify, you mean common and
Individual.
individual? Okay.
And frankly, it wouldn't really be relevant.
Individual would be the one it would apply
Yeah.
to.
Right, I guess that's
The
true.
common areas
Okay.
wouldn't have dwellings.
That makes sense.
okay,
Thank you.
all right. All those in affirming this with the condition?
Oh, yeah, sorry.
Okay. So that was 25. Condition. 26, public access required.
Public access, oh, you're ahead of me.
Sorry.
This is that the hearings official erred with an incorrect statement regarding the width of the easement providing access to lots 5 through 10. And the site plan on sheet L2, I guess, shows one width, and then there's
Right.
different mentions in the staff report of the width. And we've spelled out why we think there was no error.
Comments?
Yeah, just,
Oh, yeah, that we were saying that it's proposed at 25 feet width with 20 feet of paving. I think that's what we noted. 19 and 20, they have a 12 feet of paving.
16 through 19.
Because there's only 2 lots for that driveway.
So that's the only clarification that I wanted, because I did notice TIA highlighted, and I
But
don't
it
know
only
if it
has
was
to be 12
intentional.
feet wide.
In Appendix A, the traffic lane
It's paved.
at 14 feet wide. So is there anything in the record that confirms that 12 feet wide of paving on, for 2 lots is adequate? Because the only thing I saw on the record that talked about paving width was 14 feet in the TIA random page.
Again, in the context of a PUD like this, and then for R1, I don't believe there's a particular standard that
Okay.
establishes a required width. I mean,
It actually
the
has to be
comparable,
paved.
the comparable for a flag lot, a single flag lot would be 12 feet of width. And a comparable for the 20 feet would be a private street. And so, I mean, the concept of having a 20-foot wide driveway for multiple lots with shared access seems to make sense to staff.
Mr. Baker.
Yeah, I had the same thing because the TIA says 14, but
Might not be the
What-
right-
the one that's now,
No, it actually was specific, it just highlighted 14 feet traffic lane, but once again, this might not even apply to this.
Where,
It was in the Appendix A in the TIA provided by the applicant.
okay,
And
so
actually-
just to be clear, it was not a traffic impact analysis as that term is used. It was a traffic safety and street
You're
connectivity
right.
study.
Thank
It
you
was
for the
something
clarification.
lesser than a formal
Yeah.
TIA. I just want to be
Thank you,
clear we
thank
don't
you.
get terms mixed up.
Thank you.
I think that might be a reference to a 21-foot wide street when you have parking on one side, which this does, then brings your travel lane down to 14 feet, which is the width of a queuing street. Is that what?
Yeah, they just happened to highlight it, so I just wasn't sure of the relevance to this. So that's the thing, that's the only thing I could note about dimensions.
Again,
It'd be totally irrelevant.
my understanding is that there is no minimum width for an individual driveway in R1, and I think the limiting constraint would be whether or not that meets fire code,
Yeah,
right?
that's
And
exactly
so
right.
it may be that alternatives for something less than 20 feet of fire access need to be implemented, like sprinklers. So,
Well, and it's got 20 feet of easement, so fire lanes don't have to be paved, right? So anyways, that will, the fire marshal, but at least there's enough easement to cover the 20 feet width for fire.
well, and I guess I'd want to point back to the appeal issue where it refers to the to public access required.
Yep.
And that standard specifies the need to have access by way of an easement to a public roadway,
Right.
but it doesn't specify the minimum width.
No.
And so
Commissioner.
we have easements proposed that have been determined to be adequate.
Mr. Baker.
well, I understood that, my concern was if it serves a single lot, then, what we do for a flag lot or whatever would be adequate, but because these sort of two, I didn't understand why. I mean, you have the same issue whether it's 2 or 3, with the cars, different owners going in different directions and traveling the paths. And my concern is an easement doesn't mean that it's open, just means that there's a right-of-way that you could do something with, but there could be trees or shrubs along the side within the easement, so it wouldn't be like it would be drivable easement. So,
Well,
my thinking was you had a condition that all of the lots that serve more than one driveway have a minimum
well,
paving of a certain dimension.
if I may, so looking at the appeal issue itself, the appellants are raising the issue that the hearings official erred on page 69 of her decision when she stated that access to lots 5 through 10 and 16 through 19 will be provided via 20-foot wide shared access easements. So they're pointing out a simple error, and we've provided a clarification that
Right.
is included in your determination. So in effect, we could call this out as a modification to clarify an error on her part. I mean, to the extent she erred by saying they were both 20 foot wide and they're not,
Yeah, that's a good point.
we've resolved that. And
Yeah.
so I'm not sure that the appeal issue reaches to the adequacy of the width for two-way traffic or any of these other things.
That's a good point. Yeah.
So do we need to word that in our findings then?
We've provided that, and, you know, I can think about that a little bit more and bring them back on Thursday with a more clear reference to modifying her language from page 69.
Okay. All in favor of affirming with clarifying language? 5-0, clarify. '27. I'm gonna let staff.
Okay, I'll catch up. This one is about that the hearings official failed to evaluate evidence in the record that contradicts her findings. And that there's a number of crucial errors, inaccuracies, and omissions in the evidence and analysis presented in both the application and staff material, as well as in the hearings official's discussions. And it's all related to traffic, noise, stormwater, runoff, environmental quality.
Wait, no, this is fencing.
I'm on 28.
Yeah, 27.
27. All right, I think we've got it, so.
Okay.
Anybody have
Yeah.
notes on fencing on 27? I think we kind of talked this through pretty well earlier on. The only thing I would say is maybe this is the right position to put that we want, but I don't know. Commissioner Jaworski.
Yeah, I had a concern initially with fencing, but then it seemed to be addressed, and then it came back, because when you showed the drawings, I was always looking at the white just being the lot, but if the lot goes through the pale green, then you could have their fence right here, and right over there, you could have another fence for that lot line. That would be.
Well, again, we clarified in condition 8 that the fences could not be located in preservation areas, so that light green area would be
Okay, so
off
they have
limits
to
to a
put the
fence.
fence up there.
Yeah. But otherwise, R1 does not preclude fences. The hearings official's decision did not preclude fences according to what would otherwise be allowed in R1. And again, just to reiterate, this is raising the issue related to all applicable development standards. So we're not reaching to some of the more subjective policies of the South Hill study. We're really looking at fencing that's allowed according to the R1 development standards themselves. Typically a 6-foot fence, you know, on the side lot lines.
I think we've already addressed the sections that are unique to this particular PUD. Otherwise, this is an R1 development and should comply with the building standards at the time of building permit submittal, so I don't think she erred.
All right. All those who agree that the hearings official did not err on item number 27. 5-0. Okay, number 28.
Yeah, I don't need to repeat myself.
Yep.
The criteria is up on the screen for you.
I'll speak to this one. I think that the hearings official, this kind of goes to my feeling about this PUD as a whole, is if you look at individual criterias, yes, it hit it, yes, it hit it, yes, it hit it, yes, it hit it. This is the only one that I think you can maybe make a case that as a total, it may not have minimal off-site impacts. I don't know if I can get there with, specificity that I asked for in my email, but it kind of goes to what we have all been talking about before, gosh, it'd be nice if we had a site plan. Gosh, it'd be nice if we had this. All of these little things that actually hit the criteria might be able to be addressed here, and I don't know if we can do it or not, because it is so subjective, have minimal off-site impacts. To me, that's really hard to quantify. So I just put that out there. Commissioner Baker.
One of my concerns about this PUD application and the findings all along is we have these relatively large list of conditions to try to make it comply with the requirements. And there's a number of areas that we've discussed where we would have liked to have done something, scale and buffering and, maybe locating the building itself lower down on the elevation than upper at the top, where we know that the owner is going to want to put it at the top for the big. So I don't know how you deal with it, but I just think that you can get to a point where you've created so many conditions that you've sort of determined that really something really needs to be a little different. And I just don't know. But I wanted to throw that out. I think this one is at that point or beyond it from my point of view, but.
Mr. Taylor.
There's a comment that's on page 44 on the current AIS, that's third paragraph up from, within appeal issue 28, third paragraph up from appeal issue 29. It talks about public works staff confirms, blah, 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 blah. Demonstrates conceptual compliance with the applicable standards of EC 9.6791 through 96795, and that the stormwater discharge will occur at locations that mimic existing conditions at rates that are less than or equal to existing rates, therefore minimizing outside impacts and environmental quality. So I saw, unless someone, because I'm relying on my notes, is that I didn't see it as a condition. So I just want to make sure, is this clear in the existing criteria that's applicable at the time of the building permit submittal for stormwater for each of the individual sites? So is that why it wasn't conditioned? Yeah, okay, that's the answer. Thank you.
Commissioner Baker.
Yeah, and one of my concerns with that particular paragraph is that will be less than or equal to existing rates. I just don't, unless it was required that they use drainage swales throughout the development, which I don't remember seeing, I can't see that could be possible. You're taking a vegetated area, you're putting in impermeable streets and impermeable houses. The runoff is going to be different. There's no way, normally it would percolate through the ground, but now you have these storm discharges. I just couldn't see how that could be same, ultimately, the same amount of water will be discharged down the hill from this site, but it certainly would be discharged much quicker with the development on it than it is currently now when you have vegetation.
Well, we have stormwater management requirements, and that's what I was asking at the time of building permit submittal. So it's not like you just discharge, people develop and you just discharge into the system.
Yeah, so this information came straight from the staff report, and that was based on referral comments from our Public Works engineering staff who had reviewed the applicant's engineering analyses. And so whatever magic they do in terms of detaining flows and mimicking existing conditions and how they accomplish that, we got that confirmation through our engineering staff that it would meet the standards in the code and through our stormwater management manual. I can't speak to the specific facility types from memory, but we got that reassurance from our engineering staff, and the hearings official ultimately agreed with that. It was based on the applicant's evidence, so.
The stormwater specifically is a very detailed analysis that you have to do on any new construction for any house. And I can attest to it being very detailed. And so I'm not concerned about that. I think looking at this issue, though, coming back to the word minimal, and I guess from my perspective, we have all of these individual criteria, and it would seem to me that if you meet all of this is kind of that general summary, and if you meet all those individual criteria, I don't see how you could not meet the general summary, or the general summary is not written properly.
And I agree. I mean, so when I read through this, and when I listen to the testimony from the neighbors, there is going to be off-site impacts. You know, that is clear. Any development, there's going to be off-site impacts. And this kind of goes through it. It says, okay, you know, as far as geological things, yes, there may be impacts, but it's addressed in a condition. The clustering, you know, goes to the South Hill studies, and it's addressed in a condition. Traffic, you know, everybody says that there's going to be increased traffic. Yes, there's going to be increased traffic. It's an off-site impact, but it's taken care of in a criteria that we have to look at. Stormwater has been addressed. It's taken care of, and then noise. You know, it's all addressed. So I mean, I feel for the neighbors that are going to have to deal with the increased traffic, that are going to have to deal with the construction, stuff like that. But I can't find an area in the criteria that gives me enough ammunition to deny the application. And the only one that I had a little bit of pause on was this one, because it's so subjective and, you know, but I couldn't get there. I wanted to try and get there because this was the one that I thought had the best chance for me to get to what the neighbors wanted, which is a denial. And I looked through it, and I couldn't get there. I tried, but I couldn't get there. So I on this one, I feel that I would have to uphold. Commissioner Jaworski.
I found things also difficult for the same reasons cited by our chair, but but I did do some circling with the paragraph that was cited by one of the commissioners here to my right. Basically, I couldn't understand some of the words here when they say the stormwater discharge will occur at locations that mimic existing conditions. Existing conditions, there's nothing up there now, so when it rains and there's stormwater, it's everywhere. If you're going to have a bunch of houses up there, you got all these roofs that are having all this stormwater runoff. I don't understand how they say it mimics existing conditions. When it runs off of those roofs, are they going to be requiring, like I know they did where I live, that each housing unit put in this reservoir thing that catches it? Is that what they're going to be requiring?
There's a bunch of design solutions.
Yeah,
I know there's design solutions, but that's not saying that
No,
they're...
that's what they said. It goes into a tank, so it doesn't come out all at once, and then it's dispersed.
For each house.
There's a lot of
For each
options.
house.
Yeah.
Okay.
At development, they have to go through and comply with the stormwater management.
So I think there's detention systems that are proposed for the roadways that
Yeah,
that section might be discussing right there, plus the portion that comes down Tract A that we talked about with the
Yeah.
level spreaders, that's about the roadway system that the developer puts in. The individual lots come later when those are built, and there's the standards for what happens on that lot to not allow that.
And you're saying that
discharge and
that'll be
impact.
taken care of
And
through
that's
the
taken care of at the building
permitting
permit level,
process.
right.
Most definitely.
Yeah.
Yes.
Stormwater standards. Commissioner?
So I think, I mean, this is something I always have to, I love the state of Oregon because we have statewide planning regulations, and then each jurisdiction, we make these decisions in a comp plan that then trickles down to our building, or our land use code. And basically, these are R1 sites. there are some policies that are helping to guide development for these R1 sites because of the location, hence the refinement plan. So you've got these policies that are guiding that. But that's why it says, Commissioner Borowski actually highlights it, minimal offsite impacts. Development has impacts. I mean, if you don't develop it, you still have potential impacts that are natural impacts just because of evolution of tree, succession of forests, et cetera. But we basically have urban growth boundaries. These are R1 sites. So basically, I think the hearings official, I'm going to have a firmer decision. There are impacts that really relative to the development are the condition of approval, or the criteria is minimal offsite impacts. And I think that the applicant has demonstrated it, and the hearings official, I approve a firmer decision.
All right. Are we ready to vote on appeal issue number 28? All those to affirm and oppose? Okay. Where did I find 28? I lost it. All right. 29.
29, proposed development shall be reasonably compatible and harmonious with adjacent and nearby land uses. I think, again, we're in that same situation where we've talked about a lot of these components separately, and now it's this general, and I'll let you guys just guys in.
Yes.
I just want to, I know the appellant's argument, I hope, and I think we've addressed that because I had concerns about the outside impact in terms of geotech, and I think with our condition, we've addressed that. So it's addressed per development as the building permit's going for each of the individual lots. So.
All right. Are we ready to vote? On appeal issue 29, that the hearings official affirm the hearings official decision.
What was it?
5-0. 30.
This is a big one. This one is the assertion that the hearings official postponed determining a number of approval criteria met at a future process. And they went through a whole list of things that are basically conditioned or things that happen at building permit stage down the road. I don't think I need to read through all of them, do I? Okay.
I just had I have a question regarding sequence. And I feel like we've talked about this. It was one of my concerns at the beginning about this concern of public process based on what we have in front of us. Basically, I recognize the decisions we have to make based on the application and the criteria in front of us. So the main question I have is, what is the sequence for the final plat and a PEPI? Where's that sequential? Where does that fit in? So do you get through subdivision, final plat, and you do a PEPI afterwards, or before the final plat? Are you assuring that streets can actually be built? I mean, how does that work?
Yeah, well, maybe it would help for us to walk through all of the subsequent applications to get to the point of having construction on the site. What you're looking at right now is the tentative plan unit development approval, and so on one level, it's somewhat conceptual. I mean, there are certain things that aren't nailed down. We've discussed at length the issue of not having particular home designs, for example. But subsequent to the tentative PUD approval, the applicant is required to file for a final plan unit development application, and what that requires is the applicant to demonstrate that they've met all of the conditions of approval. That decision-making process is a Type 2 application. It does provide for public notice and an opportunity for appeal. So in the event that there were an appeal, it would go to a hearings official for a public hearing to determine whether or not the applicant met the conditions of approval. I think by the nature of the conditions themselves and the way that the wording is established in each one, it does effectively defer some detail to later stages, and that's frankly a logical, practical, realistic sort of effect of the sequence of getting to construction from a concept. So there are conditions of approval, for example, at this stage of the process that refer to documents and other things that the applicant will need to be provided at the time of final plat. Well, to get to your question, after a final PUD, the applicant needs to get a tentative subdivision approval and then a final subdivision approval. So this is essentially a 4-step land use application process. It's robust, it's lengthy, it's detailed. The tentative subdivision is also a type 2 application. Again, there's public notice opportunity for appeal. They're most often reviewed concurrently with the final PUD. Applicants typically elect to run them concurrently to save time. It's a matter of nailing down the details and the concept in the PUD plans themselves. And then at the final plat, you're really looking at, in a type 1 process, the city's evaluating things as specific as lot dimensions, right-of-way widths. We get very precise in terms of the layout of the rights-of-way, easements, and parcel dimensions. Following that, the applicant typically will file, or just about the time of final plat approval, they'll file for the privately engineered public improvement permit, which involves very detailed construction drawings for the streets, any public components of a wastewater system, a stormwater system, et cetera. Following that, typically you'll see the building permits for individual dwellings, site development permits for private streets and driveways, and things of that nature. So that's really the kind of the sequence of things.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Other comments on number 30? All those in favor of affirming the hearings official on number 30, 5-0. 31? Last one.
This one, there's no specific criteria cited, but that the hearings official erred by stating in her decision that the city deemed the application complete on August 29th, 2017. And the argument that they're making is that the applicant forced the application complete at that time. And what that means is that the applicant submitted materials. As that process goes, you submit. We either deem something incomplete and send it back and say we need more information, which we had done, I think, twice. With that submittal prior to that date in August, we were looking at it, but I think how it came in was it said, you know, like, here's our submittal and everything, and we request that you deem this complete. And I think they gave us about a week to review everything. So
I think the most important point here is to remember that the statute governs an applicant's right to request that an application be deemed complete. They take on the risk of proceeding knowingly that they haven't provided certain information, and that puts them at risk in terms of whether or not they meet the approval criteria. Our role is to identify that. We did. They requested we move forward, and we are obligated as a city to then issue a decision within 120 days. So we had no ability to reject the application or deny it out of hand based on that statutory requirement.
Mr. Randall.
And I would echo that as far as the way the process works. And I think it's really just a matter of semantics here, whether the city deemed it complete or the applicant
Right.
forced it complete. Either way, the city is forced to consider it complete and review it based on that information. So to me, it's semantics, and it was complete on August 29th, 2017, regardless of whether the applicant was the one who initiated that as a city.
All those in favor of affirming? 5-0. Okay, so at this point, I would, if we could do a quick little review of where we're at, so that we know where we're going to be at, both for people in the audience and the commission as a whole, as to areas we need to revisit, and then what we're looking for on Thursday.
Well, so rather than go through in a detailed fashion, I think our discussion covered it pretty well tonight. So I won't cover every topic area, but there are a number of areas in the hearings official's decision that we will be coming back to you with language to modify her decision, whether it's wording changes or adding conditions of approval to reflect the votes we've heard tonight. So we'll be bringing that back. My goal would be, and this is just a goal, I can't promise it, but to send out a draft final order perhaps by the end of day tomorrow, give you a chance to actually read through it before our meeting, I think at 10:30, 10 o'clock on Thursday. Let's
10:15.
excuse me, 10:15.
So 15 to
So
9.
we would hope that you have a chance to look at that and see if there's any specific wording or changes that you'd like us to make so that we can be prepared on Thursday to walk through that. I think you've seen the bulk of the findings, the language that we provided for the Planning Commission's final order. So hopefully, based on today's votes, we understand that to be supported by this body. So we'll hopefully be focusing on those areas of modification. What I will make sure to do is highlight those areas so that it will draw your attention throughout this something like 40-page document to those areas that we need to focus on. The hope would be is that we take a final vote on this, and I assume we're headed toward affirming the hearings official's decision with modification. Do you have anything to add? No?
And just for the commission, if for some reason you see that thing and you don't feel that it represents what you have, what you want, please bring back specific, it doesn't have to be the exact language, but at least specific areas that we can write a final order after that, because we got to get it in Thursday.
And yeah, just to be clear, the 120th day under statute for a final local decision on this application is Thursday. So it is our deadline.
All right, anything else from the commission? Yes.
Just to confirm, the meeting is going to be in Sloat Room?
Yeah, slow room from 10:15 until noon.
All right, that we are adjourned.